Serpents and spiders, tail of a rat, call in the spirits, wherever they're at.
Rap on a table. Oh, golly.
It's time to respond.
Time to respond. Send us a message from somewhere beyond.
Hello.
Of course, there's always my way. That's when you scream.
And then we begin the podcast.
Welcome, foolish mortals, to Critically Acclaimed, the movie review podcast where highbrow and lowbrow collide. My name is Whitney Seibold. I am a film critic for the internet, notably IGN, but other places as well sometimes, if they'll have me.
Well, we'll have you. We have our own website now, but we'll talk about that in a second.
We do have our own website now.
Talk about that in a second.
And who the heck are you?
I, the heck, am William Bibbiani. I'm also a film critic for the internet. Everybody calls me Bibbs. I write for IGN and The Wrap. And recently, Whitney and I launched our own website. It's www.criticallyacclaimed.net. Some people are going to .com. Sorry.
That's not us.
.net is us.
We don't know who those guys are at the
They're
.com
not using
address.
it.
They're not using it. I think they're realtors or something. Maybe they're agents.
I don't know.
It's difficult to tell. Whoever they are, they're hogging up all the good domain names with .com at the end.
But we're .net.
So we said, well, to heck with them. We'll start our own website with a .net domain. So you can go to criticallyacclaimed.net and see not only links to all of our writings elsewhere on the internet,
because we get a lot of requests from people like, "Hey, I want to find like all your stuff, but it's all everywhere." So starting like as of this last week, all of our material, at least the stuff that we're proud of, we'll get a page on that link and on that website, and you can follow the link and you can see it there. But we're also putting out original content. We've got new movie reviews, essays. I've got a new series there called The Beginner's Guide, because I get a lot of people asking me, where do I start? I'm a young film fan, or I'm new to a certain genre or a filmmaker, and I don't know where to begin. So The Beginner's Guide is giving you the basics. It's going to give you the information you need to become a huge film nerd. And the first installment of that is available right now. But the other cool thing about...
just an appreciator of fine cinema.
That too.
Yeah.
But the other cool thing about Critically Acclaimed is that you actually have the power, if you so choose, to force me and Whitney Seibold to write an article of your choosing. If you go to our Patreon page, which is our Patreon page for our other podcast, patreon.com/canceled-too-soon. Canceled has one L in it.
That's our other podcast.
One of the perks for $10 a month is you can assign one article per critic, one for me, one for Whitney, per year. Basically, if you're choosing, a few limitations apply, but so far we haven't run into any problems.
Yeah, well, one of the rules is we can't have written about it before, and we've written a lot. So
well, but it's like, it's okay if it was like a long time ago and it would be an entirely different article. But like,
perhaps
I just recently wrote about the best heist movies ever made for IGN. I can't do that again.
Right.
However, like if I wrote a list of like, I don't know, the best comedy sequels 7 years ago, there might be enough new material there that it's a different article. That might be okay. The other big thing we cannot do is we cannot espouse an opinion that isn't our own.
Yeah.
So you can ask us to write about it. You can even ask us to write about it while looking through a certain lens, perhaps, but you can't ask us to give a negative review to a movie we like or vice versa. We won't do it.
Yeah.
So, but again, you go to patreon.com/canceled-too-soon and you can ask us to review a movie you feel doesn't get enough love. You can ask us to do a list of recommendations. You already did one. Someone asked you through Patreon to recommend serious movies, like dramas, that you can watch with your kids that won't traumatize them. You can have a good conversation about it. That's a great article. That's already up live.
Thank you.
Right now. So there's a lot of great stuff coming to that site, and it's a hub where you can find, obviously this podcast is still on SK Plus, but we're going to link to it on that website as well as our other podcast, Canceled Too Soon, where we review television series that lasted only one season or less. So
we're everywhere, man.
A lot of content.
We're invading your consciousness.
So head on over, www.criticallyacclaimed.net, And we'd love to see you around. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think and what you'd like.
Yeah.
There'll probably be a major site redesign sometime soon, hopefully. We had to we just wanted to get started, so we just picked something simple. But somewhere down the line, we'll probably do something fancy.
It's clean right now. It's clean.
I like clean. I don't like, there's like a whole bunch of websites right now that have this very cluttered look, where it's just thumbnails everywhere, regardless of rhyme or reason.
It's like this big random scattering of, like, it's like a mosaic, like just a bunch of tiles everywhere. And I understand that that's meant for like touchscreens, like iPads and phones.
And it's appealing to look at, but if you have any sense of organization in your brain, it just hurts.
Yeah, you're just going to go nuts.
Just where are the reviews? Where are the podcasts?
We're going to keep it nice and organized and straightforward, just like the websites you saw in 1998.
When the internet was good.
Right, that's when it was good.
That was the sweet spot.
Yeah.
All the videos were pixelated, and that's the way we liked them.
You had to wait 30 minutes for that one GIF to show up of the dancing rat that said, email here. Remember when websites had hit counters? Like, you could see how many people had visited?
Back before they hid that because they were embarrassed.
Yeah.
They didn't want to look bad. Yeah, it was awesome.
And if you're a big fan, you'd hit back and then hit the link again and see if you could get the counter to go up.
Yeah, it made you feel real good. Made you feel big.
Like a big man.
Yeah.
Pushing buttons. That's enough of our hyping. What are we doing this week, William?
This week we got a bunch of new movie reviews, including the new survival drama Adrift, the sci-fi thriller Upgrade, the heist flick American Animals. What have we got? The Misandrists, which I know less about than you do, and you're going to tell me about that. And the broad comedy Action Point. We also have our big double feature of the week, the so-called / notorious / bad film is The Haunted Mansion, and we are going to be pairing that up with a classic haunted house movie of our choosing, and we will talk about that in the second half of the program. But let's get started. Let's start with the only movie you and I both saw this week.
Let's talk about Adrift.
Yeah, it may or may not be the biggest movie of the week, but we can at least have a conversation about it. Adrift is the latest film from director Balthazar Kormaker. I think I'm pronouncing that right?
I think
Forgive
that's
me
correct,
if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
He's had an interesting career full of a lot of different weird genre stuff. He did that elaborate, heist thing with Mark Wahlberg, Contraband. But he also did the huge survival thriller Everest, which was gorgeous and completely forgettable. Like, I do not remember almost anything about it except for, like, generally the cast.
Everest was one of those films whose existence I learned of, like, maybe 48 hours before it opened. They were not hyping it, they weren't pushing it, there weren't a lot of advertisements. It was just sort of away in a bubble somewhere, and I just did not catch wind of this thing.
And it's not bad, but also, I don't remember anything. I think Keira Knightley was in it, and she got to make a phone call. Like, that's it. It was this huge cast.
Was she the one, like, back down at base camp?
No, I think she was. Oh God, who's the guy? Not Jason Patrick. The guy who was in Terminator Genesis, who played John Connor.
Genesis was
the lame one. The other lame.
Yeah, the other lame one. No, the other lame Terminator film.
No, oh God, this is gonna
Jason Clarke.
Jason Clarke. I wanted to say Jason Patrick. I knew that was wrong. But yeah, Jason Clarke plays like the guy who's like leading the expedition of Everest, and like I think Keira Knightley plays his wife. But like she's just there to like, oh yeah, I made a phone call. How's he doing? No, not there. Okay, cool. I was here for one day.
It's no vertical limit.
But what is?
What is?
Honestly.
K2 The Ultimate High may be the best mountain climbing movie.
So Adrift is based on the true story of a woman named Tammy Oldham who, in 1983, embarked on a trip across the Pacific Ocean on a yacht with her boyfriend. Tammy is played by Shailene Woodley. Her boyfriend's played by Sam Claflin. From what's that movie with Emilia Clarke?
Me Without You.
Me Without You. I can't remember any of the Terminator people movies.
Like Genesis just sucked away your memories.
It was so bad, you guys.
It's really terrible.
But while they are sailing across the ocean, delivering this yacht from, I think they're in like Tahiti to San Diego or somewhere thereabouts, they run into a huge typhoon, and there's the boat capsizes.
The boat is trashed,
and she wakes up, and she is not a terribly experienced sailor, and it's basically up to her to fix the boat. At some point, she manages to like pull her boyfriend out of the ocean, but his ribs are crushed and his leg is destroyed, so he's useless, and she has to do everything in order to survive. And that's intercut with, throughout the movie, with flashbacks of how they met, how they fall in love, and their story. And I gotta tell you, I like this one.
It's perfectly effective, and Shailene Woodley is completely believable.
She's just a good actor.
I mean, she's just a great actress, but just as the kind of person who really would be living out on the road, and just kind of giving herself over to this wonderful worldly experience of going out into the world and, you know, laying your hat down. I feel like a lot of movies really try to attempt to capture that sort of bohemian travel, and they always make it seem kind of like sticky and bourgeois and like not exactly an admirable quality or an admirable goal for someone to have.
You're either escaping responsibility and you should be ashamed of that, or you're about to be kidnapped or besieged by cannibals.
Yeah.
It's kind of those are the options.
Or you're just sort of indulging yourself. Like, what was that really awful one with Robert Redford and Nick Nolte where they hiked the Appalachian Trail?
Oh, Jesus, what the fuck was that movie?
It was a really terrible one.
Terrible.
Oh, my God. Just these two old white guys.
I'm going to look that up. Avoid it like the plague.
But yeah, she captures the character of Tammy Oldham really well. I think the director could have done a lot more to make it look like she had been on the road for 5 years. Because she shows up at the beginning and she has like sort of a perfect tan and perfectly clean clothes and a nice, neat, new backpack. It's like, no, if you've been on the road, you would have looked
not going to be that perfect.
Kind of dirty and worn down a little bit. In a good way, but yeah.
A Walk in the Woods
is a
really bad movie.
How could I forget such a memorable title?
Oh my God. But yeah, okay, so there's there's a certain glorification to it. I think Adrift is very much a romance movie first and foremost. When you go into a movie like this and you think about a tale of survival, you think of All Is Lost, or you think of Gravity, you think of something really intense. And that's a part of Adrift, but I think Adrift really focuses on, I think it really cares most about their relationship. And Shailene Woodley and Sam Claflin have really great chemistry. They're really good together. I like them together. Like, I want them to succeed as a couple together, which is something you can't say for a lot of movies like this.
Sam Claflin is proving himself to be just incredibly efficient. He does what needs to be done. He is a professional, and I like the way he played this role.
Yeah, he does what he needs to do. He needs to be dreamy, but he also he's not like perfect. Like, when the gig arrives and it's actually something she's not want to do, he jumps on it too quickly, and they have a conversation about that. I appreciate that. I appreciate that he's actually the more sensitive of the two. And he'll do things like make her gifts and like build murals out of their Polaroids. Like, he's like the sweetheart.
not in that sort of like Flawless Rescue Stud sort of way.
No, that's just his vibe.
Yeah,
he's just more sentimental than she is. And ultimately, like, when they're on the boat together, that's something she can latch onto, even when he isn't doing anything else for her. Like, he can't fix things, he can't fish or whatever. There's a certain amount of this movie that is, I don't know, like, it doesn't quite have the emotional extremes you expect from something like this. You look at something like Life of Pi, which is very, it's about transcending
the extremes and the desperation and the spirituality. Yeah, it's all sort of mixed in together.
All Is Lost is about hopelessness and despair. Gravity is basically an elaborate metaphor for deciding not to commit suicide. This is basically pulling forward, keeping going, because you have love in your life and you want to perpetuate it.
Tammy uses love as fuel and just to sort of keep on going. And most of the movie is Sam Claflin is injured on the back of a boat. He can't move or do anything, but she is still managing to protect him, protect herself, use the things that he taught her to move forward, and use the fact that they're together to persist.
Yeah, it's in a weird way, because there's obviously an element of tragedy to it. I think it's a really good date movie. Hey, Sergio.
He's beating up the kitten.
He's not beating up the kitten. He's hissing at it.
He's hissing at the kitten.
We have a new kitten. His name is Luca. He's named after the protagonist of The Italian Connection, a great movie that people don't talk about enough. And the kitten is just starting to roam around the living room more, and Sergio, our other cat, our older cat, is having none of it. So he has not gotten used to Luca yet, but Luca is such a sweetheart, he doesn't care.
They're both sweethearts because they're cats.
They're so nice. Oh, he's lounging now.
Sadly, there are no cats in Adrift to bring the conversation back around.
But there are fish.
There are fish.
Haha. But yeah, no, I like this one. I wish it hit me even harder, so I could say it's a great movie. But this is a well-made romantic movie that takes you on a journey. It's worth going on. It's worth seeing on a big screen. I think just the ocean in all of its epic splendor / horror is always very cinematic to me. Even something like Waterworld, which is crap. It's better on a big screen, man. It's just the endless horizon. It's stunning to me. So
there's an element of this film that is only kind of vaguely addressed that I wish they had kind of looked at more, and it's something that was handled very well in Sean Penn's Into the Wild. Another excellent film. That's one I love. And that's sort of the consequences of the life that these people have chosen to lead. They're sort of, out there in the world. Anywhere I hang my hat is home. I will live on a boat. And there's that sort of a romance to that, living off the grid, living free.
Yeah.
That sort of, Henry David Thoreau, American frontiersman quality to it. And there's always going to be some sort of pushback from the people you've left behind or the society you've left behind. And I think there's not enough addressing of sort of the outside world perhaps encroaching on them. And the reason they get into the shenanigans they got into was because they were actively re-entering it. It was about delivering a yacht back to the city.
Yeah, in fact, San Diego is where Ten was from, and she was actively decided. She said earlier on, I literally not sure I ever want to go back. Yeah. But they decided to because that job would have funded like a year's worth of travel. Which
they kind of need. And they acknowledge that they need money to do what they do.
Yeah,
they can't just sort of live off of that. And I wish the film had been a little bit more, I guess, adult about addressing the necessity of being able, like, you can't just sort of live off the grid romantically like the way they were depicted.
Well,
there are practical concerns that the film wasn't quite looking at as closely as I had hoped.
You're not wrong, but at the same time, I think, when you look at any story, you can look at it from any angle if you really wanted to. And you have to ask yourself, what's the movie trying to present here? Maybe there's a certain amount of judgment they could have thrown at them. Well, this is what you get for sailing across the ocean, just the two of you, kind of willy-nilly, just thinking everything's going to be an adventure. But I think if they had added that level of commentary, you would have lost this, the
romance.
There's already romance. You say it's a romantic storyline, and maybe there's some value in taking the piss out of that, but I think there's also some value to that being full of piss, and I think I think this is a sweet version of that. Well, could it have been more thoughtful? Maybe.
Yeah, the theme here is that they decide to take off and go back to her home city, which she does not want to go to, and that's when they run afoul of nature, and it's almost as the comment could have been the opposite of that. That even thinking about going back is going to be your ruin.
But that's kind of the horror movie version, though, right? Because that's how a horror movie works. One little sin gets thrown back in your face 1,000-fold. Like, look at the movie The Hitchhiker.
I'm not talking about punishing her for any of the decisions she made.
Nature does at that point.
It was about sort of, she had decided to live a certain way, and it was when she started to backslide that things went bad for her. So she was actually on the right path this whole time.
Right, but then when she thought about doing something else, that's when she gets punished. I'm saying that's the horror movie version of it. It's kind of there, but I think they made a conscious choice not to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You make.
It is a true story after all.
It is a true story. You make very strong creative decisions when you decide to tell a story, and sometimes there isn't a perfect choice, and you gain something when you make a choice and you lose something else. And here they chose to focus on the romanticism and sort of back off on the real world consequence and the socio-political commentary. Maybe it would have been a better movie, but I still think they made a good one.
Okay.
Let's go to one of yours. Let's talk about Action Point.
Action Point is the latest, I guess, post-Jackass Johnny Knoxville joint. He didn't direct it, but he has a story credit. He co-wrote it.
It feels like I haven't seen it, but I saw the trailer, and like they're selling it like this is more of his vibe.
Yeah,
it's like when you see a Steven Seagal movie, like from the old school days. He didn't direct them, but they all felt like the same thing.
They were of a piece.
Like he was always like an ex-military guy who had weird secrets, who got like dragged into like they always.
There was always an element of like Buddhism thrown in there. It was.
They're of a piece.
There's
Adam Sandler doesn't direct all his stuff. They're mostly of a piece.
The theory that the director is the auteur falls apart in the face of like the gigantoid superstar genre. Like, Schwarzenegger films are Schwarzenegger films.
Tom Cruise films are Tom
Cruise films are, and he produces and he dictates a lot of the content of his own movies. So those are Tom Cruise movies, no matter who directs.
If they're anyone's, they're Tom Cruise.
Yeah, it's like Brad Bird. No, it's Tom Cruise.
Brad Bird brought his own stuff to it, and you can tell the difference in like all the Mission Impossible directors. Like, no one but John Woo could have done Mission Impossible 2. No one but Chris McQuarrie could have done Rogue Nation. But like, no one but De Palma would have done the first Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible 3. Maybe someone else could have. I actually like that one a lot, but like it doesn't really.
You like that one a lot?
I actually
really?
do because I like that it actually has an actual emotional journey for Ethan Hunt, and I think it's the best villain they ever had.
Oh, with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
I think Philip Seymour Hoffman is a great villain in that. I think it's a better story, even though the action is not it doesn't hit the peak as some of the others.
It's definitely the blandest of the series. It's like the most disposable.
I think we both agree Rogue Nation is the best.
Rogue Nation is the best.
Yeah,
and Fallout looks
3
terrific,
used to be my favorite. So Rogue Nation is my favorite. Rogue Nation success. We got off on a tangent. Johnny Knoxville.
Johnny Knoxville. And Action Point is based on Action Park, which is a real amusement park in New Jersey that opened in the late 70s and actually was in operation for about 20 years until it was just shut the hell down. And it was sold and was popular because of how dangerous it was. There were like alpine slides. People were injured there on the regular. The staff was really, always wasted. They weren't paying attention. And you could go there and it was just this sort of wildland. What was the name of the park where Pinocchio went to, where you could just
Pleasure Island.
It was like Pleasure Island in Pinocchio. And yeah, it was just this wild free place. And Johnny Knoxville, it's set in the late 70s, and Johnny Knoxville plays the proprietor of Action Point, and he's clearly trying to sell a certain kind of nostalgia for when you could go to this kind of really dangerous place and get a story. It's like, this is a movie for people who have ever lifted their shirt and said, you want to see how I got this scar? Action Park was eventually shut down because it was just so awful. It did have a water slide with a loop. I think somebody drowned on it. Action Park was one of those places that has a lot of stories, only some of which are probably true, about how people were injured or died there. And Johnny Knoxville wants to remember a time when there was such thing as dangerous fun, when there wasn't so much oversight, when there wasn't so much safety, when you knew something was dangerous going in and you didn't really care. And there's some kind of impish fun to that kind of nostalgia.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is Johnny Knoxville. Back when he was doing Jackass, he was doing some really hardcore, just punk rock crap.
There were like stapling things to their body.
Yeah, they were like nailing their penises to stuff and sticking things in their butts and snorting wasabi and drinking
like
horse
walking
fluids.
into a porta potty that's full and knocking it over.
It
was gross.
It was.
I admired the moxie of the Noxy, but I never. It was every once in a while there'd be one thing that they did that I'm like, okay, that's pretty funny. But most of the time, it was just kind of vaguely horrifying that this is what we do for fun.
It was dark anarchy, and from what I understand, a lot of the Jackass stuff sprung out of skater culture.
Yes, that's true.
Where there were you could buy skate VHS tapes that were trade amongst skaters of people just sort of wiping out and breaking bones.
Yeah,
and skaters knew what that was like, so we could kind of laugh at it. And Jackass was just sort of an inflated version of that. We're gonna crash a car. We're gonna ride down a hill in a shopping cart and hurt ourselves. And a lot of people really latched onto it. I, like you, never got into Jackass.
Yeah.
I admire culturally what he did, but I can't really watch Jackass and have a good time.
And listen, I'll give anyone credit for doing their own stunts.
Yeah.
And, seriously, I'm not doing my own fucking stunts.
Now,
you can do your own stunts, but I appreciate the effort you put into it.
Johnny Knoxville did his own stunts in Action Point. He gets blasted with a fire hose and just sort of shoots him down a rickety water slide in one shot. He sort of flies off of one of those. Did you ever ride down an alpine slide?
No.
One of those concrete half pipes. You'd sit on a little thing that's little more than a skateboard.
Yeah.
And it had a brake and it would work maybe. And you just sort of shot yourself down this concrete pipe. And it was really fun if you did it right.
I was never a huge amusement park nerd. I got motion sick actually pretty easily.
Oh, okay.
So any roller coaster more intense than Magic Mountain, couldn't do it.
Oh, okay.
I could do one, and then Six Flags is done. We're done for the day. Sorry, everybody. I know it's 10 a.m., But you asked me to ride, Riddler's Revenge, and now I'm over. I'm over it. I'm just going to stay here. I'll play Pac-Man in the arcade.
Go down to Bugs Bunny World.
Yeah, we're good.
You can't even play Pac-Man at the arcade. It cost 2 quarters, which was double the price back in the day.
Bullshit.
Now it's $1 standard. I understand.
Yeah.
Speaking of nostalgia, but Johnny Knoxville is also 47 years old now, and it looks like he just can't bring it the same way he used to. And he's no spring chicken. And I admire that he's willing to do a lot of these stunts and actually hurt himself again. But you can tell he's not bouncing back or having as much fun as he used to, which means it's not as much fun to watch.
Yeah,
and so the punk edge is gone, and all we have left is this kind of old man whiny nostalgia about how kids just don't get it anymore. And there's just the kids aren't doing it the same way anymore. And in fact, the film is bookended by Johnny Knoxville as an old man telling stories about how things used to be better back in the dangerous days. And when he's an old man, he uses the phrase nanny state to describe how bad things have gotten. Nanny state is a politically charged phrase. It underlines a lot.
It's a siren call.
It's a siren, what you might call a dog whistle. It comes out of, it started in England. I actually looked up the phrase. I wanted to know what it was. It started in England in conservative politics and now is used in American conservative politics.
And the idea is that we're too protective of our kids.
Right. And
which is a weird way of saying taking good care of our kids.
It's also a weird philosophy for someone like Johnny Knoxville to espouse. It's like he used to be this daring middle finger to the man. I hate the man, so I'm going to shove it up my ass and puke, kind of guy. Yeah. To this, kids just don't get it anymore. Things are too safe now.
Well, and he kind of grow up.
I understand that people grow up, and I understand that he can't injure himself forever, but this isn't a film about growing up. This is a film about how things just used to be better.
Well, that's what my question is the argument that he's making about how things were better when amusement parks were deadly, is it convincing, or does the movie intentionally or unintentionally make the opposite argument?
Well, unfortunately, it never builds up any sort of head of steam. There's just occasional stunts. Here's Johnny Knoxville getting shot up with porcupine quills, which happens in the movie. But there's not like some sort of sense of actual anarchy going on here.
Yeah.
There's too much of a story. There's this whole story about how his teenage daughter is coming to stay with him and they have to reconcile their relationship, and it's all scripted, and they have to steal papers from an office building at one point, and it takes a long time in between these stunts to really tell an actual like gross out comedy story.
Yeah.
And that halts everything. It makes all of its arguments completely moot because it's not fun to watch. There's no energy to it. It's just sort of limp and nothing.
Well, it sounds like you're kind of missing the point of why we're here. We're here for the stunts. It's like seeing a slasher where there's like an entire 40-minute subplot about a math competition,
and there's no killing at all during that competition.
We're here for the slashings, please.
Can you please murder somebody? They can be naked or not. I don't care. Just kill somebody.
Yeah.
So if the stunts had been more spectacular, more plentiful, more deadly, who's to say, then maybe that would have stuck in some sort of way. But yeah, it's just sort of a nothing movie. It just sort of falls flat.
You brought up a punk sensibility, and that's actually a really good segue to the film I saw, and I wish you had, because I think you would have really dug this one.
Yeah.
Upgrade.
Yeah.
The latest film from director Lee Winnell. As a screenwriter, he co-created Saw and Insidious. As a director, this is his second movie. He directed Insidious Chapter 3, which was okay. Yeah, it was perfectly competent, but it wasn't a highlight of the series.
It wasn't as crazy as some of the other ones in that series.
But it was his first directorial debut. It showed promise. Here,
we got to interview him
a couple of times,
that's
actually.
Floating around somewhere when we talked to Lee Winnell.
Yeah, we had him for, I think we had him for Insidious Chapter 3.
For Insidious Chapter 3.
Yeah, and we had him on a podcast before for a movie he did called The Mule, and I've interviewed him a bunch of times. He's a decent enough guy as near as I can tell, but I think this new movie, Upgrade, is... I feel like this is more his shebang. With Insidious Chapter 3, it felt like he was just telling another Insidious story. And honestly, it looks like he's half asleep. It's the kind of thing he probably could do in his sleep. Here, it's very punk. It's brash, it's fast, it's in your face, it is cynical, and it's a hoot. So it stars Logan Marshall Green from The Invitation, which I think is one of the best horror movies of the decade.
Yeah.
And he
plays... I agree with that.
I love that movie. Right? He plays a guy... It's in the near future. I forget if they say exactly when, but not far. 20 years tops. And... the world is increasingly automated. Everyone's got like, one of those Amazon Echo things in their house, but they do everything for them. There are self-driving cars everywhere, and Logan Marshall Green plays a bit of a Luddite. He fixes classic cars, but even that, he's only got like one client left. There's this reclusive
classic cars like Teslas.
Yeah, no, he's got like an old like Mustang from the 70s.
Muscle cars.
Yeah, muscle cars. But you have to fix it with your hands. It's not about hacking into the computer and making sure it's cool. So he only got one client left, and his client is basically a reclusive Elon Musk type super inventor. And what happens is his self-driving car with his wife crashes, and they are attacked by a gang of criminals. She is murdered, and he has his spinal cord severed. And the reclusive billionaire inventor says, "Hey, that sucks, but I have a thingy.
I have $6 million.
Basically, he has a it's basically just a computer chip. It's called STEM." And he can
isn't that cute?
Yeah, and he can insert it into like the base of his like skull or whatever it is,
his brainstem,
basically. And it will send all the signals that his body isn't sending anymore, so he can use his body.
Wait a minute, that's the premise of Mantis.
It is the premise of Mantis. Well spotted.
Yeah, that's the premise of the TV show Mantis.
It's a good premise.
Or rather, Mantis, if you're unfamiliar.
So he can walk again. He's feeling pretty good about himself. And he's like, okay, well, everything was destroyed. My life is terrible, but at least, I can stand on my own 2 feet again, and maybe there's a possibility. And then a voice in his head starts talking to him.
Oh,
and
cool.
STEM can talk to him.
Does it have the voice of John Zachary, like in the Frank Henenlotter film Brain Damage?
No, but it's got that really calm voice, that like disturbingly calm voice, like Hal.
Yeah.
Like it's got like, so it's like,
child of Hal. Yeah.
And like the idea is that STEM, they're in this together now, and Logan Marshall Green is really pissed off that his wife was murdered, so STEM agrees to help him track down the killers.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, and so he tracks down the killers. He's actually really bad at this, but he can tell STEM, like in a pinch, to take over his body. And so STEM starts attacking people and like fighting like a badass. And while Logan Marshall Green is giving this really incredible performance where his body is doing total Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan shit, but his face and his expressions and his vocal delivery is horrified at what he is doing right this second. It's a really impressive performance.
Nice.
And it all kind of escalates from there and explodes, and we see different facets of this world, and we realize that this level of body modification actually is not unique to this guy, and there are other people with like guns implanted in their arms and shit. And it's
Tetsuo the Iron Man.
It's got
stuff
a
going
real.
on.
I put this in my review, and I even debated deleting the sentence, but I decided it's apropos. This really puts the punk back in cyberpunk. It feels really
kind of edgy.
It's really, it's playing with stuff that we've seen before, but it's got this really violent, anything goes, cynical worldview. Maybe cynical to a fault. I think maybe the ending is a little too pat and a little too like, oh, the world is shit, isn't it? But I'm not sure that's mature, but that's still that sensibility that like, fuck the world, burn it down. Let's be total badasses. Let's have a dark sense of humor. It's cool. It's a low budget sci-fi movie, but it's got more thrills, I think, than a lot of blockbustery type movies because it just feels really raw.
Man,
so I dig it. I like
sounds right up my alley.
I know. I
really
was bummed you didn't get a chance to see it. Like I
was busy seeing other films, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's got some warts and all stuff. Everyone's giving a decent performance, but some characters are more disposable than others. As I said, I think it comes together a little too neatly in a way that feels like Lee Winnell is sort of chuckling to himself like, heh, got him. When in actuality, all you're really doing is kind of not wrapping up the characters as much as you are wrapping up the plot. So that's frustrating, but yeah, I dig this one. I think it's one of the better like low budget action movies of its ilk.
Nice.
In a while. So I definitely recommend checking this one out.
Sweet.
All right. So tell me about American Animals.
American Animals is a rather modest, another one based on a true story, is a rather modest heist movie. It's the true story about how in the early 2000s, a group of 4 bored college students, these 4 young men, got together and decided to rob their college's library. And
those monsters.
Well, and not cash, as it turns out that library had some really rare volumes of Audubon books by Audubon and by Darwin that were, incredibly valuable. Mostly to museums. They don't really understand that they can't really sell that stuff. They do have a fence arranged in the form of Udo Kier, who has one scene in the movie. But for the most part, they just decide they needed the money, not because they're, destitute, not because they needed to buy anything fancy, just because they're kind of bored. These are bored white college kids going to college in the Pacific Northwest. Everything's gray, everything's dull, and they're constantly talking about how awful and boring their lives are. And they are kind of inspired in dialogue by the movies they've seen. They keep talking about how this is going to be like Ocean's 11. This is going to be like Reservoir Dogs. Didn't that one turn out badly? Yeah, but don't ignore that part. This is going to be Reservoir Dogs, but it'll turn out well. And, but they don't make any sort of specific references to the events of those movies. They don't take any actual hints on how to operate a heist from those movies. They just seem to understand that movies are something that they should intellectually be inspired by. And you begin to get the sense that maybe they haven't seen those movies. And I feel like we're kind of like a generation removed now from like the Scream generation. Because, if you go back as far, and this, I'm sorry to do this line, but if you go back as far as Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, it was the first... No, it's relevant.
I know.
Bear with me.
I know.
It was the first film, credited as the first film that kind of featured characters that were behaving like movie characters that they had seen. It was about people who had seen movies, which we hadn't really seen before.
It was actually really uncommon for many, many decades for characters in movies to talk about movies they had seen.
Yeah,
occasionally characters would go to movies, and occasionally they might have a brief conversation afterwards. But the idea of just casually referencing films and living your life like you had seen in movies... really rare.
Really, really rare. And and Breathless really kind of broke that open.
Yeah, but even then it really wasn't like even super popularized until the 90s.
Yeah, and then you come into the 90s, everything's really self-aware. In the 90s, you have Pulp Fiction and Scream, where these people are trying to live like movie characters. Boiler Room is another one, where they're trying to live like the characters in the movie Wall Street. But they kind of missed the point of Wall Street in that movie.
Did.
It's like Gordon Gekko is a good guy. No, you're taking the wrong lesson from this.
Well, that's really what a lot of those movies are about, is a crisis in reading comprehension,
more or less.
Yeah, you can watch the movies when you're obsessed with how cool they look, and you're not actually paying attention to the narrative and what's actually going on.
So we have this generation of movies that are inspired directly by movies, and these kids who watch these films and comment on the films they're seeing. And I have a feeling that a generation later, these kids are commenting on the fact that people are commenting on movies rather than seeing the movies that they're commenting on.
Yeah, these are kids who saw YouTube clips
of
Ocean's 11.
Or, like people talking a lot about how cool Pulp Fiction is, and that's what they're referring to. So they seem to be completely missing the point of taking movies as an inspiration object.
Which even that is a problem.
And
that was the problem we were dealing with in the 90s.
This kind of meta-narrative is underlined by the fact that the actual people who did this heist interact with the actors who play them.
Okay.
They show up in certain... Like, there's a scene where one guy leaves a car and goes into a mini-mart, and another character stays behind in the car, and they pan away from the car, and they pan back, and the actor and the real guy, the same character, are sitting next to each other. And the actor says, "Is this how it happened?" And the guy says, "It was close." So these are...
Is that cloying or is it cute?
I wish it were more cloying in a weird way, because if they had sort of underlined it, there would be kind of a winking quality to it, kind of a wicked fun that the filmmakers are having. The filmmakers don't look like they're having any fun with it. They got the actual guys involved. They're interviewing them on camera. They're interacting with the actors who play them, and it all feels so joyless. There's just no energy to any of this. It's just sort of sleepy. Now, I went to college in the Pacific Northwest. The sky is always gray. Everything feels sleepy all the time. It could just be a result of the setting. But yeah, I wish that they had brought a little bit more panache to it. I understand all of these great ideas they have. I understand the meta-narratives they're trying to weave. But at the end of the day, just doesn't feel all that substantial. I don't think I'm going to be talking about it too much at the end of the year. So
I'm sorry.
Unfortunate.
I'm sorry. Luca keeps trying to walk next to Sergio, and Sergio just hisses, and Luca walks away, and Sergio is just like,
This movie review podcast is just going to be a play-by-play of cats from now on.
Oh my god, they're so goddamn cute right now. Oh my god. Okay. Anyway,
we'll get the kitten on mic at some point.
All right, and you probably already heard him. He's mute a little bit. He wants Sergio to play with.
If you hear a kitten mewing, it's William's kitten.
Okay, and lastly, let's talk about the misandrists.
The misandrists.
Oh, sorry, the misandrists. Is it misandrists?
I always thought it was misandry, but not misandry. The Misandrists is the latest film from Bruce LaBruce, who is this is my first Bruce LaBruce film. He's done several.
Terribly familiar either.
He came up during the queer indie boom of the 1990s, but he considers himself part of an earlier generation of what they call queercore, which is this really sort of aggressive queer punk underground film movement that was really big.
Of falling off of the couch. Will he fall off the couch?
Oh my god, you are America's Funniest Home Videos right now.
Oh my god,
you need to stop that.
You made it. He's fine. Okay,
it's too cute.
He really was.
Buy Purina cat chow.
Sorry.
Queercore. So Bruce LaBruce had a very aggressive film style. He liked to incorporate hardcore pornography into his movies as sort of a way of kind of jostling the audience a little bit.
Yeah.
Using hardcore pornography as a way of telling a story and really confronting a complacent audience. This is his lesbian film for the Me Too movement.
Okay.
Which takes everything way too far, and it's great. It's sort of like a revenge fantasy film against the patriarchy. It takes place in the 1990s in Germany, and there's a girls' school cloistered well away from everything. At this girls' school, it's also like a cult indoctrination military complex where they're teaching all of the young women to disrespect everything about men and male kind, about how women have always been superior, and that women are going to break out and take over the world at some point. And they're going to do this with a revolutionary piece of lesbian pornography that is going to be so powerful and so pure in its depiction of sapphic lust that it will wipe out everybody's minds. That's an awesome premise.
That's, I mean, look, we've all seen that a million times, but like, it's always welcome. It always works.
It always works.
Yeah.
There's a story, a young man is staggering through the woods at the beginning of the movie. Two of the young women find him and they decide to hide him. And you think for a second it's going to be like that film, either film of The Beguiled, where the man's sexual energy is going to mess up sort of the interpersonal relationships of all the women. No. The man is overwhelmed by all of the feminine energy to the point where he might actually be turning into a woman. This is a film that has no patience for anything male whatsoever. And it also addresses a really important political facet of feminism. And I was recently introduced to the term TERF. TERF, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. How there are some feminists out in the world who expel trans women from their movements.
Yeah, because they were biologically
male, so they don't count. And a lot of trans people are saying, but wait a minute.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
Our concerns are your concerns here.
Yeah.
And so there's some of that going on, and there's a lot of conversations about how to deal with trans women in a feminist polemic, and I think they find a good way of coming around to that.
Well, that's good. It needs to be more part of like the public conversation.
This is the first film I've seen that addresses that, so great. And it ends with a lot of horrific violence.
Okay.
And it ends with we get to see that lesbian pornography.
Did it like erase your mind? Like, did it work? I mean,
well, I'm still a man.
Okay.
But that it was daring enough to be that confrontational is really admirable.
Okay.
The filmmaking isn't tight. It's not the most expert film you're going to see. It feels a little sloppy at times. It kind of staggers from scene to scene in a lot. But that it is one of the few rare films that is willing to get up in your face about the patriarchy and about feminism, about queer concerns, is heartening. I feel like too many films back off. They try to sort of fold it into a story, get you emotionally involved. This one wants to punch you in the frickin' face about it.
This has been a very punk week for movies.
Yeah.
Everything but Adrift, which is this very very sweet, very enchanting.
Very romantic movie.
Yeah, it's a tragedy in a lot of ways, but it's still
everything else is about confrontation, rebellion.
And violence, and well, that's cool. So on our scale of, here at Critically Acclaimed, we review movies on a scale of C- to C+, with C+ being as good as it gets, C- being as bad as it gets, and C being The Misandrists.
A C+. Okay. I dug it a lot. Maybe not one of the best films of the year, but certainly striking, and I think worth seeing.
All right, American Animals.
A high C-. Like, I can't really get. I'm not excited about it at all, but it's not incompetent.
Okay. Action Point.
Also a C-.
Okay.
Just nothing movie.
Upgrade B+.
C+.
I'm sorry, C+.
Wrong letter.
It's that good. No, it's a C+. I'm not sure it's gonna be it's gonna linger in my mind enough to make it to my top 10 of the year or anything like that. I don't think it's as transcendently pop awesome art as something like RoboCop. For example, which I think is kind of one of the perfect sci-fi movies. But there's a lot there, and it's really entertaining, and it's super cool. And then lastly, Adrift.
A C+.
A C+. A dispassionate one.
A gentle C+.
Yeah.
I don't think it does anything horrifically wrong, but I really enjoyed it. Stop looking at the kitten!
The kitten
Jeez.
just tried to jump up on the couch, but he couldn't because he's a kitten. He almost made it, but he fell.
My point is, see the misandrists.
See this kitten, he's so cute.
Is it a male cat?
He is.
I am suspicious.
Anyway, moving on. Now, our double feature this week, your options were all films based on amusement park rides.
Inspired by Action Point. Well,
yeah.
Because why not?
Because with the exception of Pirates of the Caribbean, movies based on amusement park rides are usually not very good. I wonder why. Maybe it's because there's not a lot of material.
I know you're fond of Tomorrowland, but I know that a lot of people pan that
There's
one.
a lot of stuff I like in Tomorrowland. I don't think it's a particularly great movie, but I think that there's a lot of good stuff in it. So we didn't even put that one on the list. But your options were Mission to Mars, which a lot of people don't even realize is based on a Disneyland ride.
because the attraction's gone, so nobody knows.
It got replaced with something similar. There's also, we also had Country Bears, which is somewhat notorious but less well known. And then the one that won the poll is a film called The Haunted Mansion, based on the Disneyland ride The Haunted Mansion. It's also at Disney World. They're mostly the same. And there's
one in Euro Disney.
Is there one in Euro Disney?
It's called Phantom Manor, or Le Manor Fantôme.
It is, I would say, personally, the best ride at Disneyland.
It's my favorite ride at Disneyland.
It's great. The theming is spectacular, because a lot of Disneyland rides, it's a ride with Disney stuff. Some of the rides at Disneyland are transportive experiences where once you're inside the building, you're in another world. And the Haunted Mansion, with its paintings that stretch and become ghoulish, with its glorious, projected ghosts, with its great music and wonderful, spooky voiceover. It really does.
By Paul Frees, the immortal Paul Frees, does all of the voiceover work in the Haunted Mansion.
And then there's actually an elaborate storyline behind that mansion as well. It really does feel like you're in a haunted house.
Yeah,
and the best possible haunted house.
And it's genuinely scary, more so than you would expect for something as ostensibly wholesome as Disneyland.
Yeah, they really go all out.
Like there's rotting corpses.
There's a hanging corpse on the ceiling,
and severed heads, and people getting murdered, and it'll really startle you, especially if you're a little kid. But even if not, it's just perfectly, wonderfully. Atmospheric. I have the soundtrack CD for the Haunted Mansion, which I've listened to a bunch. I can probably recite the whole ride's narration for you.
The Haunted Mansion theme was played at our wedding.
That's
Michelle,
right.
As you may recall. We're big fans. So they made a movie in 2003, directed by Rob Minkoff, about the Haunted Mansion. That's not a bad idea.
Make it a movie about the Haunted Mansion.
They've been trying to do it for decades, actually. And after this movie failed, they tried to make another one, produced and possibly directed by Guillermo del Toro.
Which he kind of did.
He kind of made his own version of things, but he didn't do officially the Haunted Mansion. I think he probably took a couple of his ideas and used them for Crimson Peak, which I think is underrated.
It kind of mutated into Crimson Peak. And in fact, I think there's one shot in Crimson Peak where you can see that the wallpaper is that like purple with black faces wallpaper from the Haunted Mansion.
I didn't notice that.
Like there's like monster faces in the wallpaper.
I'd buy it.
Yeah.
I'd buy it.
I wouldn't put that past Guillermo del Toro.
No, I wouldn't put that past him at all. So the Haunted Mansion stars Eddie Murphy. So already you know it's not going to be scary.
It's a PG-rated family comedy that's set in a haunted mansion.
Yeah, Eddie Murphy stars as a real estate agent who works with his wife, played by Marsha Thomason. They have 2 kids. And he is, in the great Disney tradition,
a bad dad,
a workaholic.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse in the Disney world than fathers who have jobs.
This is not just Disney. This is the whole Hollywood establishment.
This is everything Tim Allen did for about 15 years.
Jim Carrey too. They're just film after film after film of these bad dads who work too hard, and it's been posited.
Filmmakers are projecting. We're spending 3 months making this movie. We're ignoring our kids. Well, we'll make a movie about that, and that makes it okay, right?
It's been posited that the producers are making these films as sort of penance to make up for the fact that they're ignoring their children and leaving them at home with their nannies. It's a tired cliche, and it's not any fresher here. In fact, it's even more stale than ever.
Well, because it doesn't actually amount to much. It's basically just...
It's not about him learning a lesson or learning to be closer to his family or anything. It's just a cliche that we know we have to include, but we don't know why anymore.
They have this, and they have a whole subplot at the beginning about him teaching his son who's afraid of spiders, which briefly is a thing. I thought it was going to they're going to have to fight a giant spider or something at some point.
He has to face some spiders later in the movie.
He has to face some spiders.
And he gets covered in spiders, and he's okay.
It's not a thing, though. It's barely worth setting up.
They're also CGI spiders, which is awful.
When Indiana Jones, after going on that huge adventure at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, after all that horrible shit he did without batting an eye, then all of a sudden he's terrified of a snake.
Yeah.
That's a little joke. But it pays off later in the movie when he's in a tomb full of deadly snakes, like packed around. Like you would think there would be a huge spider pit the kid would be stuck in. Nope, there's some spiders on this door. And the kid might have to open it. And then he does, and it's fine. I don't give a shit. Like the whole opening act of this movie sets up stuff that isn't important later. His workaholism isn't important later. The kid's fear isn't really important later. The daughter doesn't have anything going on, and neither does the wife.
The 2 kids and the wife they're cardboard cutouts. Just all 3 of them. They have no character. They have no good dialogue. They have no personality whatsoever. The teenage daughter says some things that are kind of sarcastic, but she doesn't really sell it. And so there's nothing to really back up the movie in terms of heart, because Eddie Murphy also plays, not only is he kind of a jerk, this sort of shiftless dad, but the filmmakers let him riff to the point where he's intolerable.
Eddie Murphy is one of the funniest people who's ever lived. However, when he's doing a sort of middle-of-the-road family movie, he's not trying.
And he's, because he's not allowed to cuss or say anything daring or edgy. He just has to sort of repeat the same phrases over and over again really quickly.
Eddie Murphy on autopilot is like a minor tragedy every single time. Like every time you're just like, oh, Eddie, you were so good in 48 hours.
And there were like a dozen movies in a row where he was just on that sort of autopilot.
And it's a shame. And it happens to a lot of careers. People get kind of like stuck in like a certain mold. But, and I'm sure we'll probably cover the Adventures of Pluto Nash at some point as well. And it's just sort of...
Okay, I'm the single defender of Pluto Nash.
You are the single defender of Pluto
I'm the one.
There are things
I'll defend that one.
I like the production design. How's that?
Okay.
Actually, I'm going to say this right now. The production design on the Haunted Mansion is great.
It is.
It's a cool looking house.
I wish the camera stood like a little bit more still for it. This is a haunted mansion. We need to get a really good sense of the atmosphere of the place. We talked about the atmosphere of the ride. They have the music. They even have Paul Frees saying "Welcome, foolish mortals" right at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah,
and they have a lot of the iconography from the ride. They have the hitchhiking ghosts. They have the harmonizing tombstones. All of that stuff is in the movie, but they're just racing through it so quickly that we can't really appreciate the meaning of these images or the scares of it or any of the atmosphere. It's shot like an action movie.
That's my thing. Like, when they made the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and the first one's good. Like, the first one, like,
the first one's fine.
The first one's good. The first one is a good blockbuster movie. It's got a lot of stuff I really like, and it's a bit bloated, but who cares? The first one's cool. The sequels are, at best, a mixed bag. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are really bad. Yeah. But that first one, what they did was, they incorporated some supernatural stuff, which they didn't even need to do. But because it's not in the ride to begin with.
Well, there's like skeletons drinking. They're not moving, but there's like skeletons having feasts and stuff. So they wanted to put that in. Until the movies
came around, that was never the point of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride.
Right.
But what they made was a pirate movie. It was a goofy pirate movie in a lot of ways. It was broad and brassy and not very realistic, but it was a pirate movie. What they did with the Haunted Mansion was they didn't make a haunted house movie. That's the real tragedy of this movie, is that... And listen, I had never seen this. I had heard the stories. It has a really low Rotten Tomatoes score.
Saw this in theaters.
And I was dreading it because both I and my wife, we loved the Haunted Mansion, and we were just like, oh God, what did they do? How bad is it? And we're watching it, I'm just like, well, it's not good, but it's not like... terrible.
It's terrible.
I can see why people who were kids when they first saw it have some nostalgic affection for it, which some do.
It's just more than anything, it's like a huge missed opportunity. You make a haunted house movie, please. You can cast Eddie Murphy. He's done horror movies. He was in Vampire in Brooklyn.
What's really funny is that Eddie Murphy in the 80s did a bit, I think it was in Delirious, where he was talking about how you would not see someone like Eddie Murphy starring in a haunted house movie. Because, like, in Poltergeist, they stayed in the house. But if Eddie Murphy and his family went to a haunted house and the voice said, "Get out,"
like,
Eddie Murphy would be
like, too bad we can't stay.
We're out of here. And in fact, that joke inspired the title of Get Out, the movie.
Oh, no kidding.
That was a reference to Eddie Murphy's commentary about horror movies and how black people are often not part of that narrative because
they're too smart.
Because the experience is the horrific experiences we see in a lot of horror movies are related to white. They're related to how white people would respond to these things. So it's interesting to see that Eddie Murphy finally did star in a haunted house movie. And it's just bland, middle of the road. No apologies. One thing you got to do when you do a haunted house movie, you have to explain why people stay in the house. Yeah. And the best haunted house movies do this. They're there to do an experiment, and they refuse to leave because they're stubborn. Poltergeist had a great one. The child went missing in the house, and they won't leave without the child.
That's take the child out of the house.
House on Haunted Hill had a great one. If you stay in the house, you get $1 million. That's a great premise. We're motivated by greed. Here...
Well, here it's like the walls are cursed. You can't get in or out unless the house allows you.
But that's later. What happens is they get a phone call from Terrence Stamp, by the way, who is too good for this movie.
Terrence Stamp is having a blast because he... I don't know, like, who he's trying to evoke. He sounds like Boris Karloff.
He's got a Boris Karloff vibe, yeah.
Welcome to my mansion. Yeah, like, he's putting on that sort of Boris Karloff voice.
He plays the spooky butler.
And he's having a great time.
True. He calls Eddie Murphy and his wife. They're both realtors, and they said they're trying to sell their house. And they introduce them to the master of the house, who's Hunky McHunk guy. Yeah. I didn't actually catch his name.
Some British man.
And then it's just like, well, surely you're staying for dinner. And there's like, okay, I guess we are. And then eventually Terrence Stamp just looks outside and says, oh, the river flooded. I'm like, could we at least see that? You're not justifying why they're staying here. It's not, it doesn't work. We need to force them to stay in the house.
Present that as if, it could be true, but it might not be. Like, we better be going. No, you can't go. Why not? Well, it turns out the river has flooded. Well, can we see? No, it also turns out that the door was flooded shut. Those lies you hear in the old Dark House
the
movies.
Mysterious, the ones that just don't ring true. Because that's something this movie is missing. Again, I want it to work kind of as a haunted house movie. I don't want it to scare kids to death.
Well, I want it to be kind of scary.
You want it to be spooky, and you want it to and haunted house movies have a certain way of working. The first, third of the movie, give or take, there's foreboding. There's stuff that the people in the movie don't see. There's little tiny things that they write off as coincidence or wind going through the drafty house or something, but we know better because we're the audience. And you're building anticipation for when the real spooky shit or the real big shit, if you're doing a CGI haunted house movie, You're building anticipation. Here, they don't bother, and then everything goes nuts all at once.
Yeah.
And it's not interesting.
And they're cross-cutting between all of the nutty things. Like, the kids find a secret passageway. I think it's this at the same time that Eddie Murphy finds Madame Leota, who's played by Jennifer Tilly in the movie. She's a head inside of a crystal ball, and things float around her.
Jennifer Tilly is my favorite part of this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Jennifer Tilly is really
she has some of the best laugh lines, anyway.
Yeah, she's really solid. Madame Leota's a great character anyway, like, even in the ride, but, she's really funny.
There's a scene where Eddie Murphy has Madame Leota, the crystal ball, in a car. Never mind how. And he straps first off, he straps a seatbelt around the crystal ball, which is pretty hilarious. And then he revs the engine. He's going to charge into something. He says, "Hang on." And she looks up and says, "With what?" She's a crystal ball.
And then after the car crashes and she's like stuck there trapped between like an airbag, Eddie Murphy is just like, "Okay, like stay here." She's like, "Okay, yeah."
Yeah, I'll be
sure.
here. I'll be here.
That's a good bit.
She's like at least a little bit self-aware, which the rest of the film isn't, or it is when it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, kind of random. Like
it has the right images. The ghosts are really well put together. I think
to varying degrees.
I think the design of some of the ghosts is really good. I like the way they incorporated some of the imagery from the ride into the film.
There's a cool bit where they have to go inside a crypt and get a key,
like there's actual
like physical zombies with makeup effects by Rick Baker. Those look pretty cool.
Those are pretty cool, and those would be scary if you had shot this just a little bit more like a horror movie, or at least a Joe Dante movie.
Yeah, like there's a line you can trod, and they're terrified of that line. They refuse.
They're not getting
to
even
go
close
next to it. The closest they get to it is a couple of shots in the opening credits when they're sort of quickly flashing through the horrifying history of the house, and we actually do get that shot from the ride of the guy hanging himself, like from the ceiling, which is a pretty heavy thing to begin with. And as I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, this actually might be, a little dark, a little intense. This actually might be a good kind of scary. Because you know what movie I was thinking about a lot? And I actually, we came up with our double feature pretty quickly, but I would have suggested this if I thought of it earlier. Goosebumps. It's actually really good. It's a really good kid-friendly horror movie with actual horror stuff in it. Like the Wolfman is pretty scary in that movie.
The Wolfman, like it's ridiculous when it needs to be, and when it finally, Goosebumps is a great example because when it finally gets to the climax, and we have R.L. Stine facing off against the villain. I don't want to ruin who it is.
Yeah.
But is facing off against the villain, and it's actually the film slows down. There's no quips in that moment.
It knows when to be emotionally honest and say that there are real stakes.
It's sort of like a dark place, and we finally get this kind of sense of actual dread, and that something really horrible could happen here. We don't get that moment in the Haunted Mansion ever. It just speeds past. Eddie Murphy is talking nonstop, and the jokes aren't even funny. If it were funny, I would be able to forgive it. But it's kind of nothing, despite the fact that it's this really lavish production, and it's based on a ride that I legitimately love.
Haunted house movies are about things. Now I know that sounds like almost stupidly broad, but it's true. It's not just throw a bunch of ghosts in a house and make it a thing. There actually is something.
They're about trauma, is what they are.
Well, there's about trauma. It's about the past reaching out and affecting the present.
Right,
and that could be literal. That could be figurative. But you move into a place. That place has history. And that history affects you, and often it affects you in ways that parallel the problems you currently have. In some haunted house movies, that's economic anxiety, but usually it's familial anxiety. It's
like a family previously fell apart in this space. What does that say about the current state of your own family?
Perfect example, The Shining.
The Shining.
Where, a father went insane, killed his family at that hotel, and at the beginning of the movie, we see that Jack Nicholson is a recovering alcoholic who, once while drunk, hit his kid so badly the kid had to go to the hospital. So there's already there's a crack in that dam, and going back to the place with all that history filling it is only going to exacerbate a pre-existing problem. That's the terror. It's something real being brought to life by something horrifying. With the Haunted Mansion, again, all that stuff you set up at the beginning isn't important later. It's not about, the guy who's, the ultimate tragedy of the house. It wasn't about him picking work over family. It wasn't about people, overcoming fear. It was about lovers who couldn't quite find each other, and this guy trying to seduce Eddie Murphy's wife. But they don't have that kind of a problem in their relationship where she's, thinking about leaving him like that.
Here's the only underlying theme of the Haunted Mansion, and it's actually a racial theme, because the big twist at the end, and I'm going to give it away because
it's not much of a twist.
It's not much of a twist.
It's really obvious.
It's just sort of a reveal of what the story is. In the past, the master of the house killed himself because he received a letter from his lady love, who is also played by the same actress who played Hetty Murphy's wife.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, that letter was forged. She actually was in love with him. He didn't need to kill himself. And the reason why this letter was forged was because the butler resented that he had fallen in love with somebody who wasn't good enough for him. And they don't bring her race into the conversation. It's not in dialogue. But in casting a black family, you are kind of underlining that point, that they didn't want the white man in the past, this during less tolerant times, to have a marriage with a black woman.
That's a good idea for a movie.
And that's a good idea for a movie. And if they had actually bothered to push that a little bit more, maybe make it about her and not Eddie Murphy, it would have, maybe that would have stood out a little bit.
So much you could have done with that.
There's this thing kind of simmering very gently underneath it all that the film just doesn't bother to address directly. That's the only bit of meat in this big bowl of candy.
And it's at the end, and they just kind of airball it, and it's a real shame. That's another thing I want to talk about here, and I don't blame the actors for this, but it's a thing that you noticed a lot, particularly in comedy movies, but just in general. The woman who plays Sarah Evers, the mom, is played Marsha Thomason, who at the time of this movie was about 14 years older than the kids who play her kids.
God.
Yeah, it's really just like, dude, come on. Come on. Have the kids be younger or have, like, it's just sort of like
an older actress.
Because that's something I want to talk about because it actually is going to relate to something I really like about the other movie we're talking about. Parents can be parents. Parents can be older people. Parents can be the same age. There's a lot of weird, like, considering the size of the production here, there's a lot of considerations that apparently just they did not care about or they did not think were important in the Haunted Mansion that just sap away the reality, the empathy, the suspense, the interest, the themes, just everything that could have made it interesting and not just there's some cool production design and maybe some of like, like the haunted carriage jumping out of the
through the brick wall.
Through the brick wall. That's a cool image and stuff. I got nothing against that in a vacuum, but it doesn't really do anything in the story. And the Haunted Mansion could have been, maybe it didn't need to be the all-time classic, but like it could have been a really good story, and it certainly deserved better than this film. That said, it's relatively harmless. I'll say that right now. It's far from the worst thing we've ever reviewed here.
It's not offensive. It's just sort of, it's like an old, like a atomic warhead candy. Like it's kind of sticky in the wrapper and it lost a lot of its sourness or its sharpness or its flavor, but you can still eat it.
Yeah, well,
and it won't make you sick.
Hocus Pocus is a Disney Halloween themed movie.
I haven't seen Hocus Pocus.
You haven't seen Hocus? Oh wow, okay.
It was a little after my time. I was too old
to watch
for
that
Hocus
someday.
Pocus.
But if I'd known that, I would have insisted we make that the double feature because that's another Disney movie. And it has some spooky bits. Like, it's not afraid to be actually kind of scary, but it also knows when to be campy and do a musical number. They just find this really good sweet spot where it's a little adult, it's a little childish, it's all fun, and you can take it just seriously enough that you actually have, like, an emotional connection to what's happening. It's still, a bit crinkly, a bit of, just some garbage thrown on there just for fun. But, like, that one has a cult following because as wild as it gets, at least it did things. The Haunted Mansion doesn't really do anything, although there are aspects of the production I really like. So when it came time to do a double feature with the Haunted Mansion, we had some debates. You had a late idea, and we might have done it if you hadn't come up with it so late.
Well, it wasn't my idea; it was my wife's idea.
Your wife had
my wife Angie came out with a perfect double bill, but sadly we had already committed at that point. So.
Yeah, but Grey Gardens, the absolutely incredible documentary about a decrepit house and the ghosts who live within who just happen to still be alive. It's a really incredible documentary, and you should totally see it. But it's not what we picked. We decided to go with something a little bit... We've gone a little afield sometimes on our double features, and we want to do something a little bit more...
This one's very much in line. This is the kind of film that the Haunted Mansion should have been.
Yeah.
Something that's spooky, kind of gimmicky, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Way fun, great for kids.
Absolutely. Before we get going on it, though, as always, we set out a little task for all of our Facebook friends on the Schmoville Facebook page to see if you could guess our double feature. And someone guessed it this time, and I'm super excited about that. We'll save them for last.
All right.
But the original The Haunting was on that list.
Which we talked about.
That was in our top 2 picks, so very well done. That is probably not just the best haunted house movie ever, but also one of the best horror movies, period.
Yeah.
That's a great movie, and you should totally see that if you haven't already. The Frighteners was suggested. I'm a big fan.
I'm a fan. I'm not sure if I'd defend it as a great movie. I just kind of like it for however messy it is.
Let's see. Sorry. Oh, I forgot to give the names for that. Russell Howell suggested The Frighteners. Ryan E. Johnson suggested The Haunting. A couple people suggested The Haunting. We've got Paul Oyama suggested Jack Clayton's The Innocents, which is fantastic. And 1944's The Uninvited, which is also fantastic.
That would have been a good one, too.
Let's see. Brooklyn Vale suggested one of the Amityville horrors. I'm really only a fan of the second one. I think the second one is creepy.
That's the one with Diane Franklin and the creepy incest stuff. And
it's really weird. It's dark and strange, and it's actually scarier, I think, than the original. It's really strange.
I like Amityville 1992, It's About Time.
Of course you do.
Because that one's done from the director of Hellraiser 2, and that movie's just kind of nuts.
Ryan E. Johnson suggested The Old Dark House, which...
Oh, there you go.
If you haven't seen The Old Dark House, I don't blame you. It was unavailable for a really long time, but it just got re-released on Blu-ray.
This is James Whale's The Old Dark House.
This is before they had like all of the tropes of the haunted house movie set out. James Whale was kind of inventing them. The Old Dark House is like no other haunted house movie. It's super spooky, and it's funny, and it's kind of random. Like, it's really weird. It's super great.
I wouldn't think of like haunted house movies. I think of something more like Rocky Horror when it comes to The Old Dark House.
I can see that. Brooklyn Vale also suggested Monster House. Which I'm not a fan of.
Oh, yeah?
I like the idea. The animation style is really off-putting to me. I just can't watch it.
The motion capture stuff?
Yeah, it's just the actual style of it. It just looks like early Adult Swim to me. Like, I can't buy into the reality of the movie. Right. It really puts me off. Galen Shumway suggested Nightbreed, which... I can see it.
I don't quite see the connection.
It's about like delving into the world of the supernatural, but I think it's a little thin.
Yeah. We'll get to Nightbreed at some point, because you and I are both fans of Nightbreed.
John Mariano suggested Poltergeist. That's one where we'd want to do the whole franchise, because there's enough to do the whole franchise. So eventually we'll do that. Galen Shumway suggested Sleepaway Camp 3, which I think is a joke. I don't know how that fits.
Why Sleepaway Camp 3? Like the crappiest of them?
The fourth one's
the fourth one's the crappiest one. Yeah, you're
right. Let's see. Stuart recommended The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, which is funny, but I would not put it as a classic.
No. That's a classic.
David Cohen suggested Paranorman and The Changeling. Both are fantastic.
I love Paranorman. I love The Changeling.
It's super great. Jenny Morrow suggested the 1977 Japanese film House. I think we had a couple people who just said the movie House, which I'm going to say The Other House
from 1986.
The American House.
Yeah,
they're both really good. I like both those movies.
They're quite different, however.
They're super different. Okay, we could go on. One thing I forgot to mention when we did our list was there was a Tower of Terror movie starring Steve Guttenberg and Kirsten Dunst. So I want to say thank Joe Messina for reminding me of that, because I forgot about that. That was a TV movie
based
on
the
Tower of Terror.
The Disneyland Haunted Mansion? Or the Disneyland attraction, the Tower of Terror, which has now been turned into superhero Tower of Terror. But
Mario Mendez also suggested The Legend of Hell House, which is one of the best underrated haunted house movies. I'm a big fan of that. But the one that we ended up picking was the original 1960 13 Ghosts, and I want to give a big shout out to Kevin Marino, who was the first person to guess it. Kevin Marino.
Yay!
This isn't just an applause thing. Kevin Marino, you are brilliant. You are fun. You are funny. Everyone likes you, and I think you're going to succeed in all your future endeavors. That's a shout out.
And those biceps, my goodness.
Wow. Nicely done. So you picked a great movie, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about in some detail the wonders of William Castle.
William Castle is the greatest American showman since P.T. Barnum.
I I'm not going to fight you on that.
I think that he understands more profoundly than filmmakers that are his betters what cinema ought to be. And that is a fun place to go out and enjoy yourself in public with a bunch of other people who are yelling and making a lot of noise and being rowdy. He understands that when you see a movie, you're in a building, you're in a theater, and that's an important part of sort of the movie experience with William Castle. I hear a lot of critics talk about films, and they use the word immersive a lot, or they lost themselves. They were sort of sucked into the movie.
As if that's the only good thing a movie can do.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's sort of an admirable quality the film can have, but sure. I can enjoy myself and still be aware that I'm in a theater, and often when I'm in a theater with a lot of people who are also having a lot of fun, that can make the movie better. And William Castle kind of knew he wasn't the best filmmaker, so he decided to beef up his movies by changing the atmosphere in the room. Hence, he came up with some of the most wonderful gimmicks. That's kind of what he's known for, to complement his films. In The Tingler, probably his best movie, he came up with Percepto, which is
a buzzer that was built into the seat.
Yeah, the seats would vibrate and people would leap up out of their chairs and scream, and the film would be. He also had in The Tingler, he would have a nurse come into the theater to console somebody who was screaming, who was a plant. He hired actors to scream too much and they got too hysterical, and they'd have to stop the movie, fake stop the movie, and they'd have to run down, and a nurse would carry them out, and they'd bring the lights down and start the movie again.
There was one movie, I forget which one it was, he had The Coward's Corner, where if you wanted, you could ask if the movie didn't, if you wanted your money back, you could get your money back, but you had to sit in the coward's corner so everyone could see that you were too scared.
Yeah,
you were too scared to finish the movie.
He did a film called Mr. Sardonicus, which had the punishment pole, where you had a big thumb up or thumb down placard, and at the end of the movie they'd turn to the camera and say, "What do you think? Does he get a thumbs up or a thumbs down?" And everyone would say, "Oh, he's the monster, boo, thumbs down, murder him." And of course they'd murder him. There wasn't an alternate ending.
Yeah, no one was actually counting the votes.
Yeah, there was no tally. It was just part of the movie, but you could it'd make you feel like you were actually voting.
The gimmick in 13 Ghosts was called Illusiono. Illusiono was actually a really neat idea for a gimmick. It was like 3D glasses, and if you remember before the days of the polarized 3D glasses, where they're just clear glasses.
It's called stereoscopic.
Yeah, we had just a magenta and a blue lens, one over each eye, and there would be a magenta layer and a blue layer, and when you watched it together, they would create the illusion of depth.
Refocus your eyes, and it would look like it was sticking out.
Now, when the ghosts were actually on camera, and they were what do you call it? Superimposed onto the usual film stock, so they were kind of see-through. If you wore the blue lens, I think I'm getting this right.
I think it was if you believe in ghosts, look through the blue lens,
and then you would see
the ghosts, and they'd stand out because the ghosts were in red. But if you don't believe in ghosts, look through the red lens and you see nothing.
Yeah, the ghosts would be filtered out of the movie, and they actually even made this a plot point in the film where
the characters can wear goggles that allow them to see the ghosts.
Yeah. That's fun.
It's fun.
That's really neat.
It's really fun.
No.
And it adds this interactive element. And William Castle, he appeared at the beginning of most of the movies that he directed, starting with his glory days. He actually had done 40 films before.
He was very prolific.
The stuff he's known for. But when he did his horror movies, which he always loved, he always said, "Hi, I'm William Castle." He's this gigantic guy with white hair and a cigar.
He thought of himself as a Hitchcock. Hitchcock had turned himself into a brand, and William Castle was doing the same thing. And indeed, Hitchcock actually played off of William Castle
with Psycho.
Psycho. Psycho was inspired by the works of William Castle. Super great.
I would love to. I've seen a biopic of Hitchcock. I would love to see one of that TV show Feud do a William Castle versus Hitchcock miniseries. That would be fantastic.
What I will warn you though, the only version of 13 Ghosts that you can get streaming now that I could see is on Amazon. And I was going to borrow your DVD, but you weren't home, so I guess fine, I'll spend $2 and I'll rent it on Amazon. They left out the William Castle intro.
No,
and they didn't tint it. I get not tinting it because you don't guarantee you will at home have the glasses. But you leave in the intro, for God's sake, when he explains the gimmick. It's really fun.
And even says, like, and if somebody comes in late, be sure to share your goggles with He's encouraging people to interact.
Yeah, that's part of the movie. That's not an optional
movie,
thing. You got to leave that in. That's bullshit. So the plot of the movie is there's a married couple.
They're in financial dire straits.
They're really dire. Like at the beginning, he works at a museum and he's giving like a tour, and he's called in by his wife as the repo men are taking their furniture, and she's like, "Well,
they're taking the furniture out of like this really horrible house set that they live on because it's a cheap ass movie.
It's a cheap movie, and they're taking the furniture, and the wife says like, "Well, they're taking the furniture," and he's like, "Well, why? Well, you didn't pay the bills. Oh, well, we should pay them. How much money do we have in the savings account? $2. Oh."
No, well,
so they're just shit with money.
Want to get a sandwich? Yeah.
They're just shit with money. And I will say this. It's honest. Like, we cut to them, like, later on, like, it's their kid's birthday, and they're just eating on the floor. Because they're just broke. They're in relatively good spirits about it. They're nice people. But they honestly are shit with money. And so when an opportunity comes along, and they inherit from his, like...
long-lost uncle.
His long-lost uncle, a mansion. And the exterior of the mansion, by the way, is the Winchester Mystery House.
Yes, it is.
That's an iconic location in Los Angeles. We reviewed a horror movie called Winchester earlier this year that was based on the actual Winchester Mystery House. This is a better film. And it's actually a very similar premise in a lot of ways.
That Winchester movie.
So he inherits the house, but he's also told by his uncle's lawyer, and you inherit the ghosts in it. And he's like, what?
And the lawyer's like really serious about it. Also, there's ghosts. They cut back to the lawyer. Stony face.
Like,
they come with the house.
It's super great.
And you may as well have, like, handed him a severed hand at that point. It was just creepy.
But here's the thing. They have nowhere else to go. They have no other money. They talk about financial problems. Like, listen, just not paying rent is saving us so much money. We have to live in this house. We don't believe in ghosts. Ha 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 ha. One night later. But for now, they can't do it. And even when they start believing in the ghosts, they talk about, like, we just can't afford to move.
Can't afford to move.
And then it turns out they can't sell the house. It's actually legally binding. They have to live in it, or it just goes to the state. They can't even make money off of it. So they have to live in the house. They're screwed. And again, that's something a Haunted Mansion doesn't do. It doesn't justify why they have to stay there. They are forced to. So they're in the house, and the house... again, his uncle was a paranormal investigator.
His name was Dr. Plato Zorba.
Ooh. My wife was just pointing out, just like, the two Greek names the scrreenwriter knew.
Plato and Zorba, sure.
Yeah, those are the two. Came this close to being named Socrates.
Papadopoulos.
There you go. Like, but yeah, he collected 12 ghosts.
He traveled the world.
Yep.
Collecting ghosts.
Yeah, here's an Italian chef with a big, goofy mustache who killed his whole family.
And that's all the ghost has. He has a chef's hat and a goofy mustache, but no head. It's really creepy looking.
There's a ghost of a lion tamer, and I'm not sure if the lion is also officially one of the ghosts.
The lion is one of the ghosts.
There's when they show at the beginning, like each of the 13 ghosts, one of them is two disembodied arms with an axe and a severed head. Yeah. And I can't tell if that's two ghosts or one ghost either.
That was one. Oh, the ghost with the arms, that was one ghost.
And the ghost with the head, but the
head was a different ghost.
Okay.
So you add them all up, concluding the lion, it's 12, and there's a mysterious 13th ghost.
It's a really good little twist, because when he said, there are 12 ghosts, and they think of it, 12 ghosts? Yes. Audience, you know what movie you came to see.
It's called The 13 Ghosts.
We're going somewhere with this. And I love the kid. The kid is played by Charles Herbert, who was a big, like, child star.
I looked him up. He actually had kind of a tragic life, this guy.
He did. He had top billing in this movie. That's how popular this kid was. And this is the last big movie he did. And then he did a lot of TV, and then he was just out of the industry. And he's a really fun kid.
He wasn't just out of the industry. He couldn't get work because he was aging out.
Yeah.
And there was no sort of clause in his contract that he had to have some money squirreled away. His guardians didn't necessarily take care of the finances too well. The studio screwed him out of a lot of money, and he fell on hard times. He was on drugs for a really long time, and it wasn't until he was an adult that he was able to sort of turn his life around.
Yeah.
And join some organizations that protected child actors.
Yeah.
So he came out okay on the other end of it. But he lived a really hard life there.
That's a story that happened to a lot of child actors. It's really, really tragic. But he's really, really good in this, and he plays their young son who is into the macabre. He's kind of this proto version of Winona
William
Ryder.
of William Castle.
William Castle, but also of Winona Ryder in Beetlejuice, or Corey Feldman in Friday the 13th Part 4, or The Monster Squad, where just kids like horror. And William Castle was aware of that, and he catered to it. The kid is like the second protagonist. And
I'm guessing the age of the intended audience for something like 13 Ghosts.
Because 13 Ghosts is a lot of... Okay, as cool as the superimposed ghosts are, and they're still pretty cool, like, that it's a cheaper effect now than it was, but some of the effects are really bad. There's a bit at the beginning where there's a fly in an office, and the fly is on a string.
Like
the fly, you can see
tell
the
it kind
string.
of bouncing around.
You can see the string, but that's... Again, William Castle was making interactive movies. It was okay if you knew it was a performance.
And that sort of thing is really charming. And he understands that people are kind of ballyhooing in the theater. It's like, I can see the string. William Castle knew you could see the string. He's not trying to convince you that's a real fly.
This is the cinematic equivalent of the best haunted house in your neighborhood on Halloween. You know you're going in there. You know you're safe. You know you can see the guy in the shroud in the background, and eventually he's going to jump out at you.
But you're going kind of startled anyway.
You paid for this. This is what you're here for. This is the point. And so William Castle has really got his finger on that. And I haven't seen all of William Castle's movies, but this is the one for me. I know you like The Tingler better, and I think The Tingler is about something more interesting.
Yeah, there's more adult relationships. It's got the LSD sequence. There's a color sequence.
There's this meta narrative where, like, at one point the Tingler gets loose in the movie theater you're watching it in, and that's when the chairs buzz, and that's really, really great. So there's really more complicated, interesting stuff going on in the Tingler. But for my money, 13 Ghosts is the best ride he took you on.
That's fair.
The characters are nice and likable and fun. There's a really good... The lawyer character, they actually have a nice little twist where it seems like he's really cool and he's going to start dating their daughter, but then the kid finds out where the uncle stashed his money, and the lawyer starts getting really creepy and secretive, and that actually, like, gets real dark. Mm-hmm. That whole bit's great.
I don't want to lie to my family. Well, if they ask you directly, you might have to in this case. Yeah, it's
and all the red flags are popping up in your head, and you're just like, run away, kid, run away.
If you believe in red flags, look through the blue filter.
Yeah. But yeah, it's really effective, and it hits all of, like, the thematic bullet points that Haunted Mansion deftly avoids. Like, again, the economic anxiety. It's something that Haunted Mansion kind of brings up, doesn't do. That the fact that kids are interested in the occult. You made a Haunted Mansion movie. That's a Disney movie. You're aiming it at kids, and the kids in the movie aren't interested in the occult. Let them be. Yeah, let them be interested in horror. For
there's
God's
a great
sake.
Scene early in 13 Ghosts where they go into this haunted mansion and they start using a Ouija board immediately.
Yeah.
Because that's what you do. That's what I'd do.
Yeah, why not?
And they say, like, is this house haunted? And the pointer just sort of moves off the board. Are we going to survive through the night? And it starts moving a little bit. And then a painting falls on them.
Yeah, and then the planchette starts floating around. And you're just sort of
floats through the air.
And at the end, they're just like, that was probably nothing, right? I'm like, no! No, you fools!
Well, that was weird. Who wants dinner?
But the other thing I think is interesting about 13 Ghosts is, even though it's at a mansion, this is that urban haunting that everyone gives Poltergeist so much credit for inventing.
Oh, yeah, it's in the middle of the city.
It's in the middle of the city. Like, it's a mansion, but all the ghosts are imported. There actually isn't a history in the house.
The ghosts are imported.
Yeah. So, like, they actually, like, this is a story about modern people who have modern thoughts and don't believe in ghosts and have just regular economic jobs and family squabbles and even have, like, this
trying
sort of...
to contend with the sins of the world brought upon them by somebody else.
They even have the scene in the kitchen where, like, oh, is this wondrous or is this horrifying? I don't know. And it's all Poltergeist. I'm not saying Poltergeist is bad. Poltergeist is brilliant. Poltergeist is a better movie than this. But
you bite your tongue, sir. They're both
Poltergeist is really great. I love Poltergeist. But I think Poltergeist owes a huge debt to 13 Ghosts that no one talks about.
I think a lot of people owe a great debt to William Castle.
Just in general,
Just because of his enthusiasm for the genre and how it really allowed a lot of filmmakers to expand their interests a little bit more and make that seem a little bit more normal, to be excited about horror movies.
Yeah.
Hitchcock was excited, but he kind of played it off as dark humor, which he didn't necessarily have. Like, he made a lot of dark jokes, but, he was just sort of okay with making dark jokes. William Castle loved this crap. Like, you can tell he would go to see his own movies if he hadn't made them. And I think that sort of opens the floodgates for a whole generation of horror enthusiasts to make really weird stuff that they were into. And, people like from Frank Henenlotter all the way up to Wes Craven and John Carpenter, who are making these, and yes, Joe Dante, who made a film about William Castle.
Yeah, it's called Matinee.
It's called Matinee, and it's not technically like actually William Castle, but it's William Castle.
It's directly inspired by William Castle. And again, I think that just these kinds of, we had the Universal horror movies, which kids loved as well, but I think this kind of 60s blend of horror was something that really inspired like a whole generation of people who would become the Tim Burtons, who would become the kind of people who would make The Haunted Mansion. And The Haunted Mansion doesn't get it. Doesn't get it. 13 Ghosts does. You can argue it's a little bit stodgy by today's standards, but I think, especially if you get like the version with the lenses and you actually put on your 3D glasses or whatever, just close your eye, whatever you gotta do. This is a hoot. This is a really fun movie, and I'm a fan. I just like this one. Like you can joke with it a little bit, but ultimately I can also take this movie kind of seriously, which I really love and appreciate.
A story. You've heard Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, right? Boom, boom.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. It's a popular piece of music.
That's not Tchaikovsky, though.
Pardon?
Is that Tchaikovsky?
1812 Overture is Tchaikovsky.
Okay.
And it was written in celebration of the Russian forces over the French. And
for some reason I thought it wasn't. My bad.
Okay, yeah, no, it's Tchaikovsky. You hear a story of the way that was originally performed.
With cannons.
Pardon?
With cannons.
With actual cannons. And in fact, and I don't know how true this is. This is sort of the story that was passed down to me. But Tchaikovsky wanted to perform this for a big audience, and he performed it outdoors. And he found this perfectly, like, acoustically perfect kind of bowl-shaped canyon that opened out onto the sea on one side. And on the left side of this, like, little C-shaped canyon, the orchestra was, like, just below the horizon of this big bowl, and the audience was seated just a little bit below them, which means where they were seated, they could hear every instrument echoing across this gigantic canyon.
Damn.
Across the canyon were the cannons, and on the other ridge of the canyon, near the cannons, was the church. And during the big climactic crescendo of this wonderful piece of music that's really huge and really inspiring, that's when all of the cannons start going off. It's when they start ringing the church bells. The sun is going down. You can look out over the ocean, and you realize just what a transformative experience listening to that piece of music must have been. You would have passed out of ecstasy. It's just so great. And you can listen to the piece of music and just enjoy it, but when you have that image in your head, it kind of enhances that piece of music. I feel the same way about hearing about the premiere of William Castle movies. You can sit in a theater even, or you can watch it at home, and you can kind of enjoy kind of the camp joyousness of it and the fun that William Castle is having with the audience with his gimmicks. But you close your eyes, you picture yourself during the premiere of The Tingler, and you don't know which seats are going to vibrate, but you know they're around there, and there's this thick anticipation of this wonderful fictional construction, the perfect venue in which to see one of these movies, and it enhances everything about what you're seeing. It's not quite what's right there on the screen in front of you. And a lot of people just want to say, well, you have to take just the film, the subjective movie. But you can't, because a film is its time and its place and its location and the room you're in. And William Castle is the only filmmaker I know who really, really, really took advantage of that. And I think all of his films are great classics when you sort of put that 1812 Overture overlay on top of it.
I normally try not to be the kind of person who describes their dreams, but one of my favorite dreams I've ever had, and I still revisit it, actually gives me hope, was when I was in high school. I dreamt that I had gotten lost in Pasadena, and as I think I mentioned before, when I was growing up, Pasadena had the second largest number of independent movie theaters in the country, second only to New York City.
Okay.
So there were a ton of venues, and even so, I had been to the mall, but in my dream, I found one I hadn't been to before, and I'd never seen it before, and I go inside, and they're playing a movie I've never heard of. I wish I could remember the title, but I can't. And the movie was the latest motion picture, and it was the present day at the time, so like 1998.
Okay.
It was the latest motion picture directed by Orson Welles. Frank Capra was there, Buster Keaton was there, and they were all there, and it was the afterlife, and they were still making movies, and they got to make them wherever they wanted. That, for me, is that sweet spot, that ultimate fantasy. But there's so many things I wish I could go back in time. I wish I could go back in time and see that one screening of the Magnificent Ambersons before they butchered the ending. That one screening of King Kong before they took out the spider pit sequence because it was too scary.
I want to sit through all 9 hours of Eric von Stroheim's greed.
Of course you fucking do. Of course you fucking do.
Evidently Eric von Stroheim, like, he knew that the audiences were going to get really restless, and he sat in the middle of the balcony where he could see every single person in the audience, kind of daring them to leave. And he did not move for all straight 9 hours of that movie.
All right, so listen, that is that for the double feature. I hope if you haven't seen the original 13 Ghosts, you seek it out. The remake is fun. I like the remake okay.
The remake's kind of forgettable.
I like the remake. Listen, I'm not saying it's great. I think it's got some fun ghosts. I think it's got some cool deaths. Oh, the cat. Oh, the cat.
The cat got into something?
The cat got into something because of course he did. But oh my god, the cat really got into something. Hold on a second, we gotta pause this. Damn you, Sergio!
Gotta roll that back a little bit.
No, we did not roll that back. We just left that all in, so everyone knows that Sergio is a bad cat. He got into the kittens food, and that's specifically for kittens.
A little peek into Sergio's life.
A little, he's always into heists. Steals whatever he can get. But anyway, the remake is okay, and I like a lot of those. Like, it's not as good as, I think the remake of House on Haunted Hill is better than the original.
That's an okay movie.
I think it's better than the original.
I defy you. The
original is stodgy,
and the gimmick for the original, another William Castle joint, was
pretty bad. Actually,
it was called. I'm not sure if it's Emergo or Emergo.
Yeah.
I've heard it pronounced both ways. It was a skeleton.
Yeah,
that was it.
Like a plastic skeleton.
A plastic skeleton on like a pulley system across the ceiling would be like hoisted above the audience's head, and it would just sort of run across at one point in the movie. That was it. You got to see a skeleton in the theater. If you were in the bathroom, you missed it.
I would be pissed if that was the gag.
And they did it like at the premiere, and evidently the kids got so rowdy that they ripped the skeleton down.
Yeah, they were like, you could just knock it off of the hook.
They knew it was coming, so kids would like throw their drink cups at it. It was just bedlam.
There's a good movie. Actually, there's a movie I really like. It's also very much inspired by William Castle called Popcorn.
Popcorn's great.
I think recently got re-released. It was actually kind of hard to track down for a while.
The Scream Factory did a Blu-ray.
Yeah, it just got re-released or is just about to, and it's about a horror film festival in which someone is killing people using all of the William Castle effects.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Death by lethal William Castle.
Yeah, like there's one where I think a giant mosquito is supposed to fly over, like the skeleton in Emergo, but the nose ends up stabbing someone. It's a lot of fun. I like that one. So that's our double feature for this week. For next week's double feature, all of your options, for no particular reason, are cyber thrillers from the 90s, because we have this very, very, very affectionate spot in our soul for the many movies of the 90s and TV series that told you the internet was going to kill you.
The internet is something to be suspect of and has murderers hiding in it.
So our three options, and the poll is still up on the Schmoville ! Facebook page, so you can vote on it, is Johnny Mnemonic, starring Keanu Reeves as a guy who has a hard drive in his brain who delivers files. Also, Dolph Lundgren is a street preacher who fights him.
Also, Henry Rollins is in it.
Also, Bito Takashi is in it.
Also, a dolphin. With a computer in its brain. Yeah, it's like a psychic dolphin that makes people's heads explode.
I know people who defend that movie. I do not. I'm not one of them.
It's been a while since I've seen it, so I'm not sure if I'm willing to defend it or not. I remember it sucking.
Your next option is The Lawnmower Man, a movie that was ostensibly based on a Stephen King story, but had literally nothing to do with the Stephen King story.
Stephen King sued
successfully, got his name taken off of it. It is a story about Jeff Fahey, who is a gardener with a very low IQ who gets super inhuman intelligence from virtual reality games designed by Pierce Brosnan. But then he becomes an evil cyber god who will destroy us all.
There's a psychic chimp in it.
Like you do. Psychic chimp in a RoboCop hat.
And a RoboCop hat.
Yeah. It's pretty sweet. And your last option.
From the director of The Lawnmower Man.
Oh my god, I didn't even think we were doing that.
2 Brett Leonard films.
Yeah, Brett Leonard was the master of cyberspace. Virtuosity, starring Denzel Washington as a cop in the future tracking down a virtual reality amalgamation of all the greatest serial killers who
escaped into the real world.
And is played by a young, thin, sexy
Sexy AF Russell Crowe.
who is hamming it up in a way that Russell Crowe never has before or since. It's amazing.
It's actually pretty spectacular.
It's not good, but it's amazing.
Although I don't have the novelization for The Lawnmower Man, I do happen to have the novelizations for both Virtuosity and Johnny Mnemonic.
Of course you fucking
So if
do.
you choose one of those two, maybe we'll do a little dramatic reading. Because I have those, and I got to get some friggin' use out of them.
You should write an article about novelizations for criticallyacclaimed.net.
Oh, maybe I should.
That'd be fun.
I did write one for Blumhouse.com back in the day.
Is that even still up anymore?
I don't think that one is up.
Then there you go. You can do it again. But all right. So before we go, we do have time for some letters this week. Thank God.
Yeah.
It's been a while. So you can email us letters at criticallyacclaimed.net. That's letters at criticallyacclaimed.net. You can email us with questions, suggestions, debate topics, anything at all, really. Just want to know something about us.
No.
Tell us what you think of the movies that we review. What is our first letter this week, Whitney?
I'm going to go back. I'd like to go back from our oldest to our newest.
And I like to spike it with some of our more recent ones so that we can...
just to get a good balance.
Yeah.
So this one comes from Hayden. Hayden writes in frequently. And this is about It, the movie It. On your most recent episode of Critically Acclaimed, you discussed films that are fueled by nostalgia and films that subvert nostalgia. One of the biggest hits of 2017 was It, and an aspect that isn't talked about enough is its treatment of nostalgia. Both the film and the novel are looking back at, quote, an idyllic time, realizing how much horror was going on under the surface. The film smartly contains little to no references to 1989, the year. Because of this, the audience can't look away from the horror and dare and get distracted by nostalgia. They have to face the violence and abuse that are happening in these characters' lives. I think this happened because the filmmaker, Andy Muschietti, didn't grow up in America and would most likely have no affection for 80s American culture. I find it funny that some people lump it in with Stranger Things, a show that practically bathes in nostalgia. If done right, I feel like this theme will become even more apparent in the inevitable sequel.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to talk about It in a lot of detail. Because it was out, it came out when we didn't have a podcast.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it. You, not so much. But I do like the way that the film handles a nostalgic period. I think a lot of people look upon the 80s as this sort of halcyon pop culture ideal. The way that
you say a lot of people our age.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah.
That's my point. When It came out in the 80s, the book, and then the miniseries, I think, came out in like 90, 91.
90, the miniseries,
was it 90?
Yeah.
People who were our age at the time had that same nostalgia for the 50s. That was this idyllic time where pop culture was fun, life seemed simpler.
As did Stephen King.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that I think was actually like remaking It now was actually the ideal time because I don't think people have that affection for the 70s or the 90s or the 60s. It was kind of like goes like these 30-year spurts, which funnily enough is actually how It functions.
Yeah.
Every 27 years, I want to say, it's around there, the demon comes out again, and that's kind of how nostalgia works in these sort of cycles. We don't have the same nostalgia for every single decade. It, the movie, has references to stuff in the 80s, but you're right. These aren't kids who live and die, and they only talk about things like Transformers. They go see like Lethal Weapon 2 and Batman at one point, but it's not important.
There's a really kind of dumb, cute little wink about New Kids on the Block, which I could have done without.
Oh, yeah. Well, whatever.
Look, in choosing, I understand that sort of that 30-year cycle is what It is about, and if you're going to update it, you may as well set it 30 years in the past. However, in choosing to set it in the 80s, you're kind of by default making it about nostalgia. You are showing that there was this kind of halcyon day when these things were kind of perfect in the pop culture world, and it is sort of the snake eating its own tail. Especially when Stranger Things and It come out right next to each other, you can see that this big Stephen King, very particular Stephen King flavored influence is kind of leaking into a lot of our horror fiction in 2017 and 2018. And I think that it's definitely in place in It. It's not just about these characters facing the horror in front of them. It's very, very much about horror of a childhood that took place in the 1980s. And in so doing, you can't help but think of films like Poltergeist. You can't help but think of films like The Lost Boys. And you can't help but think of the early glory days of Stephen King.
Yeah. But at the same time, it is not just about nostalgia. It is about present day as well, and we're going to get to that in the second half.
Well, I hope it will put it in sharper focus.
Well, that's the point. The miniseries kind of airballed the present day stuff, but the point of that kind of story is to look back at the way adults look at their childhood, and if you recall in the book and in the miniseries, they forget a lot of the monster stuff. They sort of wash away all the things that aren't nostalgic, and they forget all the stuff that sucks.
Yeah.
And there's a comment to be made with that, and I hope they don't shy away from that when they follow.
Yeah, because that's kind of the only point of the first movie that they'll have to put in the second movie.
All right, here's another letter. Hey guys, my name is Stefan. Get the SNL jokes out of your system. I'll wait. I wasn't going to do that. So there. And I've become a big fan of the podcast. My girlfriend is a travel nurse, and we've been traveling like mad the last year, and I love listening to you guys on the road or when we get to a hotel at night exhausted. You are both funny and really insightful, and I really dig the show. Thank you. Here's my question. As someone who was chronically ill as a child, I would watch Turner Classic Movies in the wee hours because that was all that was on. I'm a rabid TCM addict to this day. Rest in peace, Robert Osborne. From the age of 12 on, I developed a particular taste for film noir. I just love the genre so much that when I heard of a supernatural noir called Angel Heart, starring Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro, and most controversially Lisa Bonet, who got shit from Bill Cosby of all people about her blood-drenched sex scene, I had to see it. I'll buy the review. If not, check it out. It's certainly different. It stands out as a kind of novelty in the genre. I'd love to know your thoughts and get your take. Thanks for the content, guys. Keep it up. I have seen Angel Heart.
I've seen Angel Heart, too. I saw it in college.
Angel Heart's great.
It's atmospheric.
It's really atmospheric. I think it really gets...
It drags.
I think...
I remember it dragging.
For me, the problem with Angel Heart is that it's a mystery. And I think if
the audience is way ahead of that mystery.
I think the audience is too far ahead. I think the movie overplays its hand early on. However, it's very well crafted. It is very stylish and it's very creepy. If you like supernatural noir, there's actually quite a few really good ones. I'm a big fan of Cast a Deadly Spell, starring Fred Ward as Howard Lovecraft, a private detective.
It's essentially like the good version of Bright.
Yeah,
it's bright, but actually quite good.
And it's set in I think the 30s or the early 40s, and it is a world in which magic is real. And that just has an impact on things. And our private detective gets swept up in a story about a missing book, which happens to be the Necronomicon. And there are zombies, there are trolls, there are unicorns. There's just all kinds. Everything kind of comes together in a very well realized world. And I'm a big fan of it. It's very, very clever. I think it's very cool. Maybe not as creepy as Angel Heart, but a lot of fun.
Yeah. One of my favorite horror movies is In the Mouth of Madness, the John Carpenter film from the mid-90s about an insurance investigator who has to find a missing Stephen King-like author named Sutter Kane, who in the movie is played by Jürgen Prochnow, so he's super creepy, and ends up driving into essentially a fictional town that the author wrote. He drives into Derry, Maine, essentially, and finds that reality just sort of falls apart around him, which is kind of bad news for him because he's always been very pragmatic. The movie just falls into complete chaos at the end, and I love that about it.
That's the point. Yeah.
That you fall into this imaginary world where anything can happen, and anything does happen, and it's pretty wild and fun, and it's scary as hell.
I recommend a movie, which is, I think maybe isn't amazing in the first two acts. It's good, but it really kicks into high gear in the third, and it's totally worth it. Called The Resurrected. This is written and directed by Dan O'Bannon, who helped create Alien. And it is based on a Howard Phillips Lovecraft story. It is about a private detective hired by a woman who thinks her husband has an unhealthy obsession with an an old ancestor of his who was an alchemist and who could raise demons. And it gets really weird, and the makeup effects are fucking terrifying. Like, some of the best, scariest makeup effects I've ever seen in a movie. They're really great.
There's actually a lot of horror movies where detectives are the main character. I mean, even the last Hellraiser garbage movie.
Lord of Illusions.
Lord of Illusions, Harry D'Amour is a supernatural detective.
I think there's a better movie to be made out of Lord of Illusions than that, but that's still a good movie, and I like that one.
I like Lord of Illusions. I just have a soft spot for Clive Barker. You could go to The Prophecy. That's about a cop.
I like that movie a lot. That's a good one.
Fallen is a really great noir.
Fallen is a great movie if people don't talk about it. That movie kicks ass.
Denzel Washington plays a cop who's tracking down a serial killer who is executed and then continues killing somehow. So,
Seven is a film noir that sort of meets a slasher movie halfway.
It's not supernatural, but
but it's a horror movie though. I think it's a serial killer movie that meets a film noir, and they just fight each other basically to the death.
7 is so bleak and nihilistic, it's almost funny. like you want to know what like kind of bleak nihilism we were digging in the 1990s? Watch 7. It's kind of silly.
Yeah.
Here's a letter. Can we move on?
Keep going.
Okay, here's a letter from Jacob. Hello, Jacob. Good evening, gentlemen. I saw I Feel Pretty this week, the Amy Schumer film.
Okay.
And towards the end, I began thinking about an amusing double feature based on your structure. I Feel Pretty, the bad feature, I guess he didn't like it,
okay,
is about a woman using what's inside of her to rise to a successful career in the fashion industry and is ultimately rewarded with happiness. The Neon Demon, on the other hand, the good feature, is about a woman using what's on the outside to rise to a successful career in the fashion industry and is ultimately destroyed by it. Perhaps I was just so bored by the end of I Feel Pretty that I was just thinking about better movies. What do you think? That's
you
a
saw
good
I
double
Feel Pretty
feature.
and I didn't.
But you saw The Neon Demon.
I did.
Yeah. I Feel Pretty is, about that sort of inner beauty and about sort of confidence and feeling better about yourself. And yeah, The Neon Demon is... I'm not sure how self-aware it's supposed to be, but if you think of it as being self-aware, it becomes better. If you don't, it's still kind of good because it means Nicholas Winding Refn is just completely clueless about what he was trying to say, and that's kind of amusing unto itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is about sort of the horrific artificiality of the fashion industry. And,
which I think also keys into the artificiality of Nicholas Winding Refn's work, but
which I think is kind of a comment on his own work. But I'm not really sure
aware of it.
You think so?
I think he's a little aware of it. I don't think he's always aware of it, but I think Neon Demon is him acknowledging that he's
empty spectacle mostly.
Well, or that he's at least wants to talk about the idea of empty spectacle.
Yeah.
That his empty spectacleism has a purpose. So fair enough.
And however, the Neon Demon like sort of spins off into this weird horrific territory that kind of offsets what I Feel Pretty is about. So it's a good choice, though.
Well, I mean, you don't necessarily want them to be the same movie. Sometimes they are, and that's interesting. Sometimes they just sort of bounce off of each other in an interesting way.
Comment on each other.
And like because you watched one movie first, you're really going to focus on that theme in the next movie, even if the next movie doesn't support it. I think that's interesting. Here's a letter from James. Hey, Bibbs and Whitney, longtime listener from BB's podcast, Canceled Too Soon, and now this amazing podcast. Thank you. I can listen to you guys talking about the worst movies of all time to amazing content about the most obscure and weirdest things we can find in our pop culture in general. Your content is amazing. Thank you. That's very, very kind.
Sweet of you to say.
Having said this, always had this question. I have always wondered how directors factor into a final product of a film when there is talk about studio meddling. I look at a movie like X-Men Origins Wolverine, Fantastic Four, and Alien 3, where they are regarded as horrible films and the blame comes on the directors, when it was clear that the director didn't have the final say in how the film turns out. Would we want to blame the director, or can we safely blame the studios for interfering with the final vision? I would have really wanted to see a fully realized David Fincher version of Alien 3, or would have wanted to see how Fantastic Four would have turned out if Josh Trank had a chance to finish his vision. How much can we safely blame directors for a, quote, failed film? Or how much can we blame the studios for how much they wanted to change a film? I'm not saying there's anything to this. I'm just segueing off of the thing. I do think it's interesting that all of the examples are from 20th Century Fox.
Curious.
Isn't that kind of funny? Every studio has stories of this stuff.
Look,
Disney has stories of this. Every studio has stories of meddling.
We go by the auteur principle, just as a public. We tend to see the director as the final artist.
By default.
By default. We're encouraged to think that way. That's actually a theory that was advanced by Cahiers du Cinéma, if I understand.
Yeah.
By critics. It wasn't something that we just sort of naturally fell into. But no film is entirely the work of the director.
No.
The studio has
Unless they literally did every job. There's no film.
Yeah. Unless you're looking at Turnation by Jonathan Couette, who shot and edited and did the music and did everything in that movie.
It can happen, but it's incredibly rare.
It's really, really rare. So if you're looking at a big studio film, the studio had a lot of hand in that. And you know what?
They okayed the screenplay, they hired the writers, they okayed the premise.
Sometimes the studio had to do reshoots. The script is never, ever just the one credited screenwriter. There's always at least a dozen on the bigger ones.
And even when you're not factoring in a studio, film is just a collaborative medium.
Exactly.
Usually directors work with different screenwriters, different cinematographers, different editors. People share ideas, and hopefully they're all working towards the same goal to make a movie that they're all on the same page about.
When a film fails, people like to say, well, whose fault is it? Well, a lot of people don't do that when a film succeeds. If a studio came in and they fixed something that a director perhaps overlooked, or they shot an extra scene that actually codifies something in a screenplay, that people don't say, the studio, good, they saved it.
Yeah.
Because that's not hip thinking.
Yeah.
People like to
play the blame game.
Play the blame game, and also, stick to the idea that the director is the sole author. Now, I do subscribe to that theory, auteur theory, that the director is the loudest voice. They are the director. They are directing the film.
It's their responsibility,
but if they're
not
a good director, they are making sure that everybody's on the same page,
including the studio.
Who was it that said the biggest job of the director is just to make sure everyone is making the same film?
Sidney Lumet, the director of Dog Day Afternoon and Network, one of the best directors ever.
Yeah, Sidney
wrote
Lumet.
a great book called Making Movies. I recommend it to anyone who likes movies.
Yeah, so the director is kind of overseeing all of this, but at the same time, it's a collaborative thing. So when a film falls apart, it's when you can tell it's studio meddling that it becomes a problem. Where you can tell that the tones start to shift partway through, or characters start to change, or they're all of a sudden something really abrupt. You can tell when there's production troubles, like they started shooting one movie and then they had to change partway through and still use that early footage, so they had to kind of repurpose
Star Wars story.
That's one of them. Some people say Justice League, although I think that film works surprisingly well for however messy it was.
It's super messy, but it actually functions okay. I think what we're looking at here is, you're right. No one says like, oh, who do we blame when things go right? Look at who we blame when things go wrong, because we just wanted to say, oh, there you go, that's it. Because usually the answer is really complicated, and there's a whole bunch of different people who couldn't get along, someone got fired, and then the project got handed off to people who didn't understand it, and everyone's trying to do what they think is the right thing to do, but yeah, they're not all making the same movie. If you're not on the same page, someone gets cold feet. These things happen. I think maybe the real issue we need to think about is our collective tendency, and God knows I've done this as well, and I think we all need to try to grow out of it, to blame people at all. I mean, sometimes there are reasons. I'm not saying that no one is blameless, but maybe the issue shouldn't be, Warner Brothers, they brought in Joss Whedon, or Joss Whedon did that on Justice League, or Zack Snyder made a bad movie, so Joss Whedon had to come in and fix it. Doesn't really matter. The real tragedy is that
you didn't connect with the film.
The real tragedy is you didn't connect with the film, and that there was that much of a mess in the first place. There are other reasons where people actually deserve a lot of blame. You fucked up. You deserve some credit for doing whatever you did, but yeah, it's all our tendency to try to make it easy. I think even auteur theory, it only exists really to try to make conversation about film
a little
easy.
bit more streamlined.
Instead of just saying the 25 to 5,000 people who were responsible for making a movie, you can just say, that's Alfred Hitchcock's movie.
Yeah.
All right, it's easier to say because that's his job. He's the wrangler.
Do you remember the movement? There was this movement, I think, in the late '90s, where you see it in the credits of a film how it says, an Alfred Hitchcock film, and then they'll show the title.
John Carpenter's Vampires.
They wanted to change that to the screenwriter's name.
Oh, I remember hearing about that.
There was a very brief, not very effective movement in the '90s to say even though the director would be credited as the director, when it said apostrophe S, the genitive case.
But the screenwriters are often the screenwriter is often taken off the project. I've met a lot of screenwriters who have, and I'll ask them about earlier movies that they've done, and they'd be like, "Hey, you worked on, I don't know, superhero movie C," and they're just like, "Oh yeah," and they're just like, "Yeah, most of my work on that film isn't in there, but I did enough structural work,
or I did that one scene or that one line,
so I'm in the credits, but I'm actually not." That's not my movie. I didn't do anything with that. I actually heard someone suggest online, and I don't know where it started, so I don't know who to credit for, but I think it's a good idea. Because right now there's arbitration to decide who gets credit for writing a movie. You have to change this much of the movie. You have to have this much involvement in the script. They have to have used this much of your draft. Someone has suggested, what if we just put the name of every writer you hired? And some people are just like, well, but that would make it look bad. Then maybe you hire too many screenwriters and you should hire the right people to begin with and commit to a single vision.
Some of your favorite movies might have been written by 50 screenwriters.
And that's not a terrible thing. It's okay to just admit that.
Those Marvel movies are written by 50 people apiece.
You can even do it like, the bulk of the work was done by these people with additional writing by. Boom.
I've seen that additional screenplay material and you just list all 50 of those people. It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
They all did work. They should all get credit.
So the perhaps dissatisfying answer to your question is it's very, very hard to pin down because it's often a case of different viewpoints. The old joke, we had creative differences. I'm creative and they were different. Part of it's viewpoints, part of it's conflicting stories, part of it is film is a collaborative medium and it's usually more than one person involved.
Couldn't collaborate on some certain element.
The big thing is it's a tragedy when a movie falls apart.
Yeah.
Regardless. So, and if there are reasons why it falls apart that are a tragedy on top of that and not just we had competing creative visions or the test audiences didn't like the ending. There are horrible reasons why movies fall apart sometimes. That is an additional tragedy. But most of the time, shit happens.
Yeah. Also, why are we even having that discussion? If you see the movie and you like it or you dislike it, who cares whose fault it is? You just didn't like it. Just walk away.
Well, we want to
it's fun to delve, and it's fun to sort of look into the backstory of how the film got made and sort of uncover the mystery as to why it fell apart. But if you didn't like it, you can just end it there. Or if you loved it, you can just say, I liked this film. It's okay to leave that film there. You don't necessarily have to investigate.
You've talked about this before in print and in other podcasts, the idea of the armchair studio executive.
Yeah.
Where we all know...
We feel like we want to get involved with the studio politics when we have no stake in it.
We all talk about stuff that really doesn't affect us very much as audience members. Decisions,
stuff like grosses.
Stuff like box office grosses. On one level, if a movie you like does well, you'll probably get a sequel. Beyond that, the gross doesn't matter to you. You're not going to make any money off of that. It doesn't. That's a business thing. That's not the fan thing.
And in fact, you're not earning money. You gave money.
Yeah.
You're putting money into the system.
Yeah, like I get that you like to think that it went to a good cause, but like
you're just giving money to a big corporation.
Yeah, but even stuff like all the behind the scenes stuff. Guess who's in talks? Most of the people who are in talks for things don't do them. Think about all the rumors you heard that didn't pan out. Maybe they were always false. Maybe they were briefly something someone considered but didn't pan out. It's a waste of our time most of the time. I get that it's fun. I'm not telling anyone they can't do it. I'm just saying maybe we take it all a little too seriously.
It's a fun game, but it's just a game.
Ultimately, what matters is when the movie comes out, how is it? That's what matters. That's the biggest thing. That's, as a fan, do you like it?
Yeah.
That's it. All that really fucking matters. All the behind the scenes stuff. It's fun to think about, and I appreciate the question, and I think it's a question that relates to how we talk about film. I think it's a good question, but I think it's kind of just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's do one or two more.
This one is not signed, so I'll just say by anonymous. Hi again, you two. I hope you're having a fantastic end to a week. Your last episode about Mario Bava, this was for our Danger Diabolic episode,
good one.
reminded me about Anna Biller, the creator of The Love Witch. Many critics said it clearly drew inspirations from the exploitation films of old, such as the ones by Mario Bava or Russ Meyer. The interesting thing is Anna Biller directly refuted that sentiment and were offended that people would link her movie to exploitative, specifically sexploitative movies. So my question is, how should we view exploitation flicks of the past, and how can we make exploitative flicks in the future? Thanks for reading and stay classy. Well, exploitation movies are exploitative. That's their point. That's their raison d'etre. And
I think
I actually had a reckoning kind of recently about this, because I would go see a lot of trashy old movies from like the 70s to the 90s, a lot of 80s sex movies, and most of these movies are grievously, horrendously sexist.
Yeah.
By design. They were meant to strip women for a male audience, and that's kind of it. Hence the term exploitation movies. And I was growing up in the 90s watching these movies from 20 years previous, able to, at the time, really put a filter over my eyes made out of irony. I was able to really kind of look back and kind of chuckle about how backward it was while still kind of enjoying the exploitative elements. This is horrible. I recognize that. I can still enjoy how dumb this is and still have a good time. In the wake of Me Too, I can't do that as easily as I once did. Can I watch these brazenly sexist movies with irony any longer? Because you look at the world of exploitation movies, the way midnight movies tend to operate, and it is another boys' club. You look at the way a lot of theaters program midnight movies. This is a little bit in the past. It's been getting better recently, but it tends to be really bro-centric stuff. And especially recently, a lot of midnight movies have been big blockbusters from like 20 or 30 years ago that were really appealing to a male audience. A lot of action, a lot of
Mortal Kombat,
Mortal Kombat, Terminators, that sort of thing. They were rarely films with female protagonists about female issues made by female filmmakers. It was all guys, and the audience was all guys. With
there are exceptions, but
women would come, but it was overwhelmingly
the target
male.
demo was male.
Exactly, and I enjoyed this midnight movie world. I thought it was very, very vital. I loved sort of exploring the outer rims of cinema, and I think there was a lot of really great stuff going on in there, but it was a very male-heavy world, and it's really difficult to make an exploitation movie when you're really aware of how exploitative it is.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Exploitation cinema, there are, of course, tragically examples that run counter this, but the basic idea of exploitation cinema is that it exploits the audience and their base desires. Their base desires to see violence and sex and everything in between.
Everything prurient and low that is within you.
And without usually much in the way of artistic context. You can make violent movies that are great art. You can make movies with sex that are great art. There are also a lot of movies that use them just for base titillation.
Whole generations of genres based on that.
A ton of it. And I'm not saying there's nothing that can be learned from that. I'm not saying it's impossible to enjoy those movies. But we talked about this very recently on the show, the idea that all art is political. And the idea behind that is all art either says, even if it doesn't have a directly political message, even if it's not talking about capitalism or any other ism, every work of art either affirms or challenges what is acceptable. And when you get a whole group of people in an audience saying, look at how we enjoy this, irony goes. And there is, even if you're enjoying it ironically, there is something that is just being said, which is, this is fine. And that has, I think, a ripple effect. And I think that's something that we really, really are overdue to look at, not just on an individual film basis, but en masse. Now, I'm not saying that we can't make movies like that. I'm not saying that exploitation movies are impossible to make anymore, but we all have a lot of growing up to do.
And we have
that's, I think, fair, right? We all agree on that we all have a lot of growing up to do in general?
Watch Michael Haneke's Funny Games. And then come back to me. Because that's a film that is very much about the way the audience is implicated in on-screen violence. And,
we came here to see the violence, therefore we're okay with it.
Yeah, you're okay, and you're signing off on it, and you're kind of morally accepting that violence is entertaining, even though it's horrific.
Yeah, but in actuality, you're looking at a reality up there, and there are people who are, within the context of the story, suffering, and Michael Haneke is saying, and you should feel bad.
And you should feel horrible. About
bad that you went to see Funny Games.
Yeah.
And it works. It's a brilliant movie.
Yeah, but both versions. They're pretty much identical, so you can really see either version.
Yeah, it's just a straight up
I'm not going to say that the American remake is better or worse. They're identical.
They're the same movie.
Yeah. We can make exploitation movies because we'll always have those prurient interests, so long as the filmmakers, I think, are willing to play responsibly. And there's a way to make exploitation movies responsibly.
Absolutely, there is.
And I think Russ Meyer was actually weirdly keen on doing that. He
sometimes more than others.
You look at his classic, Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
That's a good movie.
There's two coins to this.
I think
two sides of this coin, because it's a good movie because... Yeah, he casts these really buxom women, and he's just going to, lean the camera really close to their bodies and really ogle them. They are in control. They have all the agency in the movies. The men are all horrible, they get the better of them. These are really actually strong, interesting women, even though they say really stupid crap.
Well, they all do.
Because it was written by Russ Meyer. But,
yeah. But that one holds up pretty well.
Yeah, you're a really funny chick. Try me. I get funnier. There's a Tura Satana there.
She's fantastic. Yeah. And listen, I don't even want to make a lot of blanket statements about we talk about how there's a male demographic. I know a lot of women who enjoy a lot of those movies and get something out of them. Really get something out of them. That's great too. But we have to start thinking about art as at least kind of a social responsibility, we shouldn't be disregarding that part of the conversation.
Right.
I'm not saying that needs to be the only thing you think about. And I think, we also need to think about the way that art represents parts of ourselves that we're not proud of or we're not comfortable with, or, individual ideas and fantasies that aren't popular. We need to still be able to explore those. But we shouldn't forget to ask ourselves a question, why are we making this? And what impact do we hope to have?
Yeah.
And I think we can ask those questions and have good answers and still make fun movies that are violent, that have sex in them. You can do all that stuff.
And there are some movies that I think are just like brazenly irresponsible that I still have a great time watching. Yeah. Taken is one of those.
Yeah.
Taken has like all kinds of horrific, irresponsible messages.
Yeah.
And I still enjoy watching it kind of because of its like brazen irresponsibility. Orphan, I think, is another one.
Well, I think we run into a trap sometimes where and listen, when I say that a movie offends me or offends my sensibilities or I think it's irresponsible, I am talking about my opinion.
Yeah, well, you're a critic. That's what you do.
I just want to make it clear here. I might be speaking with a voice of some authority, but or at least that's the idea anyway. Hopefully you're listening to us not because you think we're all idiots, but, I'm where was I getting at with this? I'm speaking. This is my opinion, and if you can appreciate these films on a level that we're not, or you say like, okay, listen, I appreciate the exploitation, but I see all these things that's fine. That's totally fine. But art reaches a lot of different people and has a lot of different impacts. And one of the things we talk about as art critics is the efficacy of that message. How effectively is that message being conveyed? And again, there's no easy answer for that. People get good messages and bad messages out of the same thing. Anyway, we got off on a tangent here. It's a lot of depressing things going on. That's a big question.
That's a really great question. I'm glad you really brought it up.
I wish I had a great answer for it. I just know what I'm thinking.
Well, I mean, it just requires us to think about sort of the way we look at movies, and I think we would all do better to do that. Even if we're enjoying something irresponsible, it's okay to say that's irresponsible. I still have a reaction to it.
You should be aware of it.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Sure.
You should be aware that this is not this is not this would not be cool. But I can watch this.
Yeah,
that can be okay. But you should be having this conversation at least.
Anyway, that's our show.
That is our show. Again, you can email us letters at criticallyacclaimed.net. Letters at criticallyacclaimed.net, almost said .com. Don't forget to check out criticallyacclaimed.net, the website, where we have new reviews, essays, links to our other work all across the internet. If you want to contribute to us and to the Critically Acclaimed site, and also even potentially contribute and get the reward where we have to write articles you assign to us, head on over to patreon.com/canceled too soon. You can also follow us on Twitter. I'm at William Bibiani.
I'm at Whitney Seibold.
And thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back next week with reviews of Ocean's 8, Hereditary, Hotel Artemis, and maybe more.
And maybe more, depending on what we can get to.
And we'll also be reviewing the notorious cyber thriller from the 90s of your choice over at the Schmoville ! Fan page. So thank you everybody again for listening. You're really awesome. And
every last one of you.
We love all your letters and everything like that. Everyone's super smart and cool. So thank you everybody. And never forget, everyone's a critic.
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?